Utah is turning into a desert, and it's happening way faster than anyone thought. In just a few decades, the state's most famous lake could dry up completely. And when that happens, huge clouds of toxic dust could cover entire cities, forcing millions of people to leave their homes for good. So, what is really going on? Utah is a western state in the US, and locals like to joke that it's already pretty much one big desert. And honestly, they're not that wrong. Most of the state is scorching hot and dry. In fact, Utah won the title of the second driest state in the entire country. But that only feels like a win if you actually enjoy temperatures of 101 degrees Fahrenheit. But when I say desert, don't picture endless sand dunes like the Sahara. Utah's deserts are more about canyons, rocky landscapes, and very scarce vegetation. And if you look at the state from above, a huge body of water immediately stands out. That's the Great Salt Lake, the largest saltwater lake in the entire Western Hemisphere. But soon, it might not even be a lake at all. Yep, this whole region is turning into a desert, no exception. That's a big deal because the Great Salt Lake isn't just any lake, it's essential for them. And there are three big reasons why. First, there's the cultural side. Long before any major cities ever showed up, it was already a place of deep spiritual meaning for indigenous tribes in Utah. Then there's the wildlife. This region is a crucial stop along the migration routes of about 10 million birds, including eared grebes and American avocets. For them, it's a place to feed, nest, and rest before continuing their journey. And finally, there's the economy. The Great Salt Lake is worth big money, bringing in about $1.3 billion a year for Utah. But its reach goes far beyond the United States and supports industries all over the world. This place is packed with brine shrimp, also known as sea monkeys. These tiny crustaceans are very important since they feed fish farms in dozens of countries. Believe it or not, almost half of the world's brine shrimp supply comes from the Great Salt Lake. But it's not just about these little creatures. This region also gives us magnesium, sea salt, and other minerals that keep Utah's economy running. It's such an important spot that it provides jobs for about 9,000 people. Now that you know how essential the Great Salt Lake is, here's the hard truth. It's drying up, fast. And there are two big culprits: the weather and, well, us. You see, the lake's been feeding the effects of shifting weather patterns. For a while now, more of the region's precipitation has been falling as rain instead of snow. And that's bad news. Snow is better for the lake because it piles up in the mountains and melts slowly, feeding the lake over time. But now, with less snow and more rain, the lake isn't getting refilled like it used to. And then there's the human factor. Starting back in the early 1900s, authorities began building dams, canals, and pipelines around the lake. The idea was simple: divert the lake's water to farms, factories, and the fast-growing towns nearby. People along the Wasatch Front have been actively diverting water from the lake for over a century. But in the last few decades, things have really ramped up. Think about it. Back in 1982, the Salt Lake City area had around 700,000 people. Fast forward to 2025 and it's about 1.2 million. That's a lot more showers, crops, and industry all pulling water away from the lake. And that brings us to where things stand today. Parts of the Great Salt Lake are now only about 40% full by volume. Sure, the water levels rise and fall from year to year, but overall, they've been dropping for decades. Back in the 1980s, the Great Salt Lake stretched over more than 3,000 square miles. By 2021, it barely covered 950 square miles. At this rate, the lake could disappear completely within just a few years. Pretty terrifying, huh? And the danger isn't just about the cultural history that could disappear, the millions of birds that could be lost, or Utah's economy taking a massive hit. The air itself could become harmful, turning this whole region into a dangerous place to live. Turns out, the sediments at the bottom of the Great Salt Lake are packed with materials that show high reactivity. In simple terms, stuff that could be bad, even toxic for us. When the lake shrinks, the exposed lakebed dries out and turns to dust, and that dust doesn't just stay put. It gets picked up by the wind and blown straight into the air. The problem is that the lake is pretty close to big cities, and the dust that could come from it might carry metals like manganese, iron, copper, and lead, all of which can seriously irritate your lungs. When that happens, it can trigger inflammation and lead to respiratory issues. Experts believe it might also be connected to heart problems, developmental defects, and other serious health risks. These findings were published in 2024. At the time, scientists admitted they couldn't yet confirm whether those toxic substances were reaching populated areas. They still needed better equipment to track the wind and all. Even so, people were already worried. Then, in May of 2025, the headlines hit. A dust storm carrying toxic elements had, in fact, swept across the Salt Lake Valley, impacting residents in some of Utah's most densely populated areas. People in Magna and Tooele County actually watched a massive plume of dust roll right over their cities. So yeah, even though we still need more studies to know just how bad things could get, or if the biggest cities will be hit, groups like the nonprofit Grow the Flow say the disaster is already underway. They report that dust storms from more than 1,000 square miles of exposed lakebed are already drifting into nearby communities, affecting the air people are breathing right now. This is just one reason why the situation is becoming such a big crisis, and why the authorities are so concerned. But it's not like there's nothing that can be done. People in Utah are already taking steps to turn things around, or at least keeping it from getting any worse. Over the past few years, Utah's authorities have made getting water back to the Great Salt Lake a top priority. They've done it by creating special policies for farmers and setting up new tools to track water flows, for example. They believe those efforts are starting to pay off. The lake hit a historic low in 2022, but the winters of 2023 and 2024 brought above-average snowfall. When that snow melted, the water ran into rivers and helped the lake rise a little. That's good news, but not great. I mean, the lake is still several feet below what's considered an ecologically healthy level. So, they had to come up with more ambitious plans. And recently, almost 23 billion gallons of water were sent from Utah Lake to the Great Salt Lake through the Jordan River. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 750 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's enough water to supply about 3,000 homes for a year. The good news is that most of Utah's lake water comes from snowpack melt. And not long ago, it was nearly 96% full. So this plan is a real win-win. It helps keep the Great Salt Lake at a healthier level, and it also helps prevent flooding at Utah Lake. This is probably just the start. Over the next few months, the Great Salt Lake could get another boost from more controlled water releases across its basin. Of course, this problem is far from over, but every drop of water helps. If these efforts keep going, Utah might actually have a fighting chance to save this precious lake and keep the area from possibly turning into a desert.
Do you know what one of the most dangerous and scary lakes in the U.S. looks like? Let's check it out. This large lake is filled with blue water reflecting the sun's rays. Lush thickets of oaks and other trees surround this picturesque place. More than 150 small islands, which are the tops of hills, stick out from under the surface. People come here to swim and play frisbee, go boating, and sit quietly on the sand. Nothing dangerous, right? But if you dive underwater with scuba gear and start exploring the seabed, you'll see that it hides old fishing nets, broken sunken boats, debris of houses, and even graves. If you go to the local library and start researching the history of this place, you'll find out that many people were kicked out of the area against their will. You'll learn that there were terrible conflicts between locals here. You'll understand that the idyllic picture hides a terrible drama and hundreds of tragic fates. This is Lake Sidney Lanier, which is in North Georgia. It was named after writer Sidney Lanier, who created the poem Song of the Chattahoochee, dedicated to the river that feeds the lake. Despite the beautiful view, this isn't a natural body of water. Sidney Lanier is an artificial lake created in 1956 to fight floods caused by the river, to provide people with drinking water and hydroelectric power. The perfect place for creepy stories that often happen in small American towns. Before people created the lake, about 700 families inhabited this place. They made up a classic quiet village with farms, houses, churches, mills, and a cemetery. But when the state decided to create a lake here, the authorities forced people to leave their homes. Locals had lived here with their families for generations, and then they had to go away. Most of the buildings were moved, but the cemetery was left untouched. The graves are still there at the bottom, while people on the surface are swimming and having fun. 200 years before the lake appeared, the Cherokee tribe had lived in this place. In the 1830s, they also got kicked out of their territory. Then, in the first half of the 20th century, there was a very big conflict between locals. The reasons for the conflicts are quite scary, so we won't dwell on them. But it's important to note that more than 1,000 people got hurt by this conflict and were forced to leave their homes. So, we have a place where tragic episodes have happened 3 times, and where a lot of people have been injured throughout history. Of course, there's no scientific evidence that those events had any effect on the lake. But if we talk about spiritual, karmic plane, then see for yourself. Lake Lanier is considered one of the most dangerous lakes in history. 500 people have drowned or disappeared here since 1956, and almost 200 since 1994. About 11 million tourists visit the shores of the lake every year. About as many people visit the Louvre Museum in Paris. But don't think that accidents happen here because there are too many people there. A few dozen miles to the west, there's another popular lake, Altoona, and the same number of tourists come there every year. But there are almost 3 times fewer accidents there. For some reason, people drown at Lake Lanier, and motorboats often collide. There are no seasons with more or fewer accidents. So the cause of these tragedies may be hidden underwater. Many sunken boats, fishing nets, flooded villages, and graves lie at the bottom. Perhaps when someone dives here, they get tangled in nets, or stuck among debris or bump into rocks. Motorboats may not notice tourists passing by on air mattresses and crash into them. The water in the lake isn't very transparent, which makes it difficult to search for the missing. And then, there's also the legend that spirits inhabit this lake. Locals talk about phantoms who come out of the graves and try to pull the living under the water. Others tell stories about 27 ghosts of those who drowned in the lake over the years, but whose bodies haven't been found. But the scariest legend is probably the one about the Lady of the Lake. In 1958, 2 friends, Delamay Parker Young and Susie Roberts, got into their car. They drove to the gas station, refueled the car, didn't pay for the gas, and went to the lake. The evening started fun, but it turned into a terrible night. The girls drove off the bridge when they were crossing the lake and disappeared. For an entire year, no one knew what had happened to them, but people thought that the lake had taken them. One day, a local fisherman went to the lake to catch some fish and suddenly noticed a body in a blue dress floating near the bridge. It was poorly preserved, so the examination couldn't determine the identity of the person. But many locals were sure that the body belonged to Parker Young. Some people saw that day that she borrowed this dress from Roberts and put it on. But where was the other girl, and why was there no car? A few decades later, in 1990, authorities discovered an old Ford sedan at the bottom of the lake. They extracted the car and found the body of Susie Roberts inside. After this tragedy, locals started telling scary stories about how a transparent Parker Young in a blue dress grabs passers-by by their clothes and tries to drag them into the water. So, what do we have now? 3 terrible events have occurred at this lake over the last 200 years, affecting thousands of people. There's an old cemetery at the bottom of the lake, which the authorities decided not to move. 2 girls drowned there. At first glance, these events are not related to modern accidents. But honestly, we all feel and understand this connection inside. Places with such heavy energy and such a past may influence the present. Some skeptics will argue with this, but let's be honest, hardly anyone will buy a house when something terrible and tragic has happened. Today, Lake Lanier is more popular than ever. Millions of tourists, beautiful views, and picnics. Nothing suspicious, but you should still be careful. Just open the internet and read about the accidents happening there. Those missing people didn't expect their vacations to turn into a tragedy, so be very vigilant if you decide to come there. Now let's finish our video with something mysterious but more upbeat. How about the Vanishing Lake in Northern Ireland? You come there, swim, take cool pics, and decide to come back for a picnic with your friends. You come the next day with your homies, but hey, there's no lake. It's gone. Your friends are so angry. They come all their way there because of a silly prank. You feel like you're going crazy. Well, calm down. You're fine. There was a lake. In fact, it's still there. It just has a curious geological quirk. 3 streams fill this lake, but none of them can flow out. The lake fills up quickly, and then, when it reaches a certain point, it just flushes away, like the water in a toilet bowl. There are gaps at the bottom of the lake that are clogged with peat and debris. They act like bath plugs. But when there's too much water, these plugs fly out and the lake goes underground. So relax and come here another day when it's filling again. The road that leads to the lake is slightly raised off the ground so that people can walk along it. Previously, this road went underwater and reappeared. And don't be surprised if one night you see an old horse-drawn carriage on this road. It does look scary and creepy. Legend says that more than 100 years ago, a carriage with horses was crossing this lake when the water level was high. The carriage sank, and locals have been telling scary tales about the phantom ever since.
Mount St. Helens is exploding. A massive earthquake is ripping through the area, and a side of the volcano is giving way, crashing down in a deafening landslide. A towering wall of rock, ash, and debris is roaring down the valley, flattening everything in its path. Then comes the blast, a sideways explosion of superheated gas and volcanic debris. Trees are snapping like matchsticks. Homes are vanishing under an ash cloud so thick it blots out the sun. Ashfall rains down on towns hundreds of miles away. People are scrambling for masks and fleeing roads blocked by mud flows called lahars, toxic rivers of volcanic mud. The air fills with dust. Emergency sirens scream. Airports shut down. Hospitals fill with people struggling to breathe. The sky glows eerie orange as lightning storms ignite within the ash cloud overhead. This nightmarish scenario might play out very soon. Mount St. Helens, the famous volcano that blew its top in 1980, is acting a bit restless lately. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, about 350 earthquakes occurred from February to June 2024, and 12 more from September 2024 to January 2025. It was like a bunch of tiny tremors throwing a party underground. Most were so tiny you wouldn't even feel them. But on May 31st, 2024, there was one that hit magnitude 2.0. It's just strong enough that if you were nearby, you might have felt a little rumble. Don't freak out yet though. Over 95% of those quakes were super small with a magnitude less than 1.0. Scientists say this is the biggest burst of shaking since the volcano last erupted in 2008. But the volcano has already done this before. In the late 80s and 90s, it didn't blow up, so more earthquakes didn't mean an eruption is guaranteed. What's really going on might be something called a recharge. which is like the volcano's version of refueling. Magma, the hot melted rock, slowly climbs up from deep underground and fills a big underground magma chamber about 2.5 to 6 miles down. When magma fills this tank, it can cause a lot of stress underground, which makes the ground shake. Right now, there's no other sign that the volcano is about to blow. No weird ground bulges, no extra gas leaks, no heat spikes. The USGS says this level of shaking can go on for years without anything major happening. The alert level is still at normal. But it was very different back on May 18, 1980. Mount St. Helens unleashed one of the most explosive volcanic eruptions in history. And it all started with a huge earthquake, bigger than magnitude 5. But this wasn't just any earthquake. It triggered a massive landslide that ripped off the top of the volcano and tore away the rock and ice that had been holding everything down like a giant lid. Suddenly, the pressure that had been trapping superheated water underground vanished. That water instantly turned to steam, and boom! It burst sideways in a powerful hydrothermal blast. And that was only the beginning. With the top gone, the magma beneath the surface suddenly felt free. It started rising faster, forming bubbles and erupting with terrifying force. For 9 straight hours, Mount St. Helens was sending ash and gas miles into the sky. This giant blast didn't come out of nowhere. The warning signs started months before. On March 16, 1980, tiny earthquakes shook the volcano for the first time in years. By March 27, after hundreds of quakes, Mount St. Helens had its first little steam eruption in over a century. It threw ash and rock into the air and blasted a crater in the icy summit. The volcano kept getting angrier. That crater grew fast and cracks spread across the summit. At the same time, eruptions went from one every hour in March to one every day by April. Then things quieted down for a while. Few people realized that the danger was just beneath the surface. By May, over 10,000 earthquakes had rattled the mountain. The north side of the volcano swelled outward, growing about 450 feet. It was a bulge so huge that it looked like the mountain was about to explode. Scientists knew that magma was pushing up inside, creating a hidden cryptodome, a giant underground pocket of molten rock. And then it blew, shattering the mountain and changing the landscape. On May 18, 1980, exactly at 8:32 a.m., a magnitude 5.1 earthquake hit Mount St. Helens. Without any obvious warning signs, the entire north side of the volcano, the part that had been bulging out for weeks, suddenly broke loose and slid away in a massive landslide. This wasn't just any landslide, it was the largest debris avalanche ever recorded on Earth. Imagine a giant mass of rock, dirt, and trees rushing downhill. It was like dumping 1 million Olympic swimming pools full of stuff into the valley. When the cryptodome got ripped away, the pressure inside the volcano dropped incredibly fast, and this sudden pressure release triggered a huge sideways explosion that tore through the landslide debris. This lateral blast was insanely fast, over 300 miles per hour, and it ripped through everything in its path. Trees were uprooted, forests flattened, and a giant cloud of ash and hot rock shot straight up into the sky. In just 15 minutes, that eruption cloud soared more than 80,000 feet high, way higher than an altitude of 35,000 feet, at which commercial airplanes fly. The blast destroyed an area nearly 19 miles wide from west to east and stretched over 12 miles to the north. In the zone closest to the volcano, almost no trees were left standing. At the blast's far edge, the remaining trees were scorched and burned. A huge area, about 230 square miles, was covered by a thick blanket of hot debris. That sudden release of pressure also affected the volcano's plumbing system. all the way to the underground magma chamber. With less pressure holding it back, the superhot magma suddenly expanded and rushed upward toward the surface. Starting just after noon, fast-moving pyroclastic flows, superhot clouds of gas, ash, and debris, raced out of the crater at speeds between 50 and 80 miles per hour. Those flows formed what we now know as the pumice plain. Scientists say the eruption hit its most powerful stage between 3 and 5 p.m. When the violent phase finally ended, the summit revealed a brand new giant crater shaped like an amphitheater. All day long, the winds carried over 540 million tons of volcanic ash east across the United States. The ash was so thick it caused total darkness in Spokane, Washington, about 250 miles away. Ash also fell as far as central Montana and could even be spotted hundreds of miles farther east, all the way to the Great Plains, which is over 900 miles from the volcano. The massive ash cloud spread across the entire US in just 3 days and then circled the entire planet in just 15 days. But there was one more problem. The hot gas and rocks were so wild and fast that they melted and ripped up a lot of the snow and ice sitting on top of Mount St. Helens. That sudden rush of melted ice and water mixed with loose dirt and rock, creating fast-moving, dangerous mud flows called lahars. Those lahars tore down the mountain into the river valleys, and the biggest, nastiest lahar hit the North Fork Toutle River. As this muddy, powerful flood barreled downstream, it picked up more dirt and debris, growing bigger and stronger. It smashed through bridges, crushed homes, and finally slammed into the Cowlitz River, reaching its peak size around midnight, about 50 miles away from the volcano. The whole natural disaster took the lives of more than 50 people. After the eruption, the mountain looked like a wasteland, and scientists wanted to see how life could start fresh in such a harsh place. So, their unusual plan was to release a few gophers to dig around the barren soil. Those busy burrowers churned up ash and volcanic debris, digging deep enough to bring buried bacteria and fungi back to the surface. Tiny microbes, especially mycorrhizal fungi, are crucial because they help plants get water and nutrients. It's like hooking roots up to a nutrient highway. Within 6 years, places where gophers worked got covered with over 40,000 plants. At the same time, nearby untouched areas stayed mostly lifeless. The fungi helped plants grow in the soil that was otherwise nutrient-poor and lifeless. Even old-growth forests buried under ash bounced back quickly, thanks to their own fungal networks. But where forests had been clear-cut before the eruption, no such comeback happened. No trees, no fungi, just burned soil even decades later.
According to the United Nations, India became the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America stands in that rating? It's number 3, and America is the 4th largest country in terms of size. It takes up some 6% of Earth's landmass. Plenty of space for 335 million people who live there, right? No need to squeeze them into one region. Well, not quite. The population of the U.S. is distributed pretty unevenly. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It'll run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. Once you input census data and do some math, astounding figures appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live to the west. That's just 1 in 5 Americans. We're talking about large metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. You don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the U.S. at night. The right part is shining pretty bright, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in population? Simply put, history and geography. The East Coast is the place where the U.S. became independent in 1776. These are the original 13 colonies. Soon enough, settlers started spreading westward. One important milestone was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, this region is mostly what we call the Midwest. The area aligns nicely with the Mississippi watershed. Yup, this means plenty of fertile soil ideal for agriculture. But does this automatically mean a spike in population? The demographics of the U.S. reveal that a majority of its citizens live either on the east or the west coast. This leaves a large patch of land in the middle of the country virtually empty. People know it as America's underpopulated belt. The area stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total surface area of this strip of land is 350,000 square miles. That's twice the size of California. One massive piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip accounts for 12% of the contiguous United States. That's the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs north to south through 7 states, but its population makes up only 1% of the total number of people living in the United States. Now, this doesn't mean that the area is completely empty. It's still home to just over 3 million people. That's roughly the population of the island country of Jamaica. But there is room here for many more residents. Let's take the example of Nigeria. Its total land area is slightly bigger than the sparsely inhabited belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a huge 206 million people. This makes it the 7th most populated country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't the American Midwest living up to its potential? Well, time for one last history lesson. I've already mentioned how the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. This doesn't mean that the West was lagging too far behind. Take, for example, the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were incorporated in 1850. That's just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon became incorporated. You get the picture. And then, in 1869, the United States completed building its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was unified. There is no historical reason strong enough to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. So now it's time for some interesting geography. If you look at the physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies in the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the area is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. Well, not really. East of this region, there is a huge patch of the color brown. It's covered by mountains. But not just any mountains. These are the Rockies. The range is around 76 million years old. It has several peaks over 14,000 feet. And most of the Rockies are national parks, a vast nature reserve. But most importantly, the range plays a vital role in the region's climate. Ever heard of the rain shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. Then they travel east, where they meet the Rockies. Now the air has to go up over the mountains. This is where it cools down and condenses. The final result? A lot of rain and snow for the people living on or west of the range. And just a few drops east of it. When air from the Pacific finally reaches the Great Plains, it doesn't contain much moisture anymore. In fact, the weather system starts taking up moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate east of the Rocky Mountains. That's the exact location of the belt where so few Americans live. It's one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came in the 19th century, they were like, nah, I'll just continue west. Plus, there was the gold rush in California they were heading for. The climate in this part of the plains isn't great for agriculture, and huge fluctuations in air temperature don't help either. In a single day, temperatures can drop from 70 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. These sudden changes in outside temperature are harmful to human health. It's like stepping inside an air-conditioned room on a sizzling summer day. Not a pleasant feeling. Southern California has a similarly dry climate, yet close to 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous U.S. state. Their secret? A vast network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, plus a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains get very hot, while winters are extremely cold. The reason behind these wild weather patterns are polar winds. They get a piggyback ride along the ridges of the Rockies and then rapidly descend into the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, but later in the afternoon, the temperature can easily drop below zero. You just wouldn't know how to dress, and you probably wouldn't want to relocate here. That's what 99% of Americans think too. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we choose to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You've guessed it correctly, it's Australia. Nearly 70% of the country is either arid or semi-arid. That's a subtle way of saying that it's a desert. That's why Australians are huddled in coastal areas. 90% of them live in big cities, such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. They build it inland close to a water source. But Australia's interior is sparsely populated. Just like in the States, there is only one major town in an area the size of 12 Lake Michigans. A huge shout-out to the residents of Alice Springs. They truly live in an oasis. And what about places with a temperate climate, like Europe? The population is evenly distributed here, right? Well, yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in urban areas. They have plenty of major cities to choose from. Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Köln all have over 1 million residents. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population over 1 million can you name? Okay, Paris, definitely. It has over 12 million residents in the metropolitan area. But now comes the staggering fact. The next two cities on the list have a population of barely 2 million, respectively. Can you notice the huge imbalance? This is the case in most large European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital, Athens. So, the largely underpopulated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is the land of opportunities, but chances of finding a better life are greater in large cities. The country's top 100 metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of the nation's GDP, and most of them are located on the east and the west coast. There are no cities with over 1 million residents in America's underpopulated belt.
It's one of America's strangest contradictions. The Northeast, the cradle of cities, commerce, and crowds, hides a vast, empty wilderness at its northern edge. Millions live packed together to the south, yet up here, there's space for everyone, and almost no one takes it. How did this happen? How did the heart of America's most crowded region end up with one of its loneliest frontiers? The northeastern United States is home to more than 50 million people. It's one of the busiest and most densely packed regions in all of America. But almost 90% of those people live in the southern half of it. If you go north, past big cities and highways, everything will change. The noise will fade and the lights will thin out. You'll find yourself in a different world. A quiet land of forests, lakes, and mountains, stretching across northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. This is America's empty Northeast. And the mystery is simple. Why is this part of one of the most crowded regions in the country so empty? First of all, let's take a look at New England itself. Massachusetts and Rhode Island are bursting at the seams, while Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire feel wide open. Connecticut sits in the middle, literally and figuratively. Massachusetts is basically the crowd magnet. Most people live around Boston and the cities nearby, Cambridge, Worcester, Springfield, where everything's close, busy, and built up. Rhode Island may be tiny, but it's got a big city density. Connecticut sits right between Boston and New York, and it shows. It has a busy coastline and quieter inland towns. It's not too crowded and not too empty. The middle ground. Once you cross into New Hampshire, things slow down. There's Manchester and Nashua, but most of the state is forests, lakes, and open land. Then there's Vermont, easily the least crowded region of the bunch. The Green Mountains slice through the middle, and most people live in small towns or villages. And Maine is huge and mostly empty. Most people stick to the southern coast. If you head north, you'll hit endless forests, lakes, and long, quiet roads. It's beautiful, but it feels like the edge of the map. Today, the northern half of the Northeast, northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, holds only about 4.9 million people. That's roughly the same as the population of the Boston metro area alone. To put that in perspective, if you take southern New York and southern New England, about the same land area, you get 10 times as many people living there. So, why the gap? It all comes back to geography, history, and economics, and how they've always worked together to keep the North empty. Let's start with the land itself. The thing is, the farther north you go, the rougher the land gets. Southern New England and downstate New York are full of rolling hills, wide valleys, and coastal plains. But then come the mountains. They're old, crumbling, and wild. In northern New York, you'll see the Adirondacks. To their east, the Green Mountains run up the middle of Vermont, stretching into Quebec. Keep going and you hit the White Mountains of New Hampshire. They're home to Mount Washington, famous for some of the most severe weather on Earth. And beyond that, the western Maine Mountains roll on toward Canada. Those aren't gentle hills, they're real barriers, and they owe their shape to one of the most powerful forces in Earth's history: ice. During the last ice age, huge glaciers covered this land. When they finally retreated, they carved out deep valleys and left behind thin, rocky soil. Later, the basins filled with water, creating thousands of lakes and ponds. It's a beautiful but difficult land to live on. Farming never stood a chance here the way it did farther south, where the soil is way richer. So the mountains stayed wild, covered in dense forests that even today stretch for miles. Northern Maine and the Adirondacks together make up one of the largest continuous forests east of the Mississippi. For centuries, people have come here to cut timber, fish, or hunt, but never in great numbers. And then there's the weather. Up here, winters are long, dark, and cold. Snow piles up early and doesn't leave easily. Summers are short, and the growing season is barely long enough to farm. It's not exactly a place that says, "Come start a new life." But of course, some people did. And here's where history comes into play. Long before Europeans arrived, this land was home to indigenous nations. The Abenaki, living across Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, had complex trade routes, connecting their communities all the way from modern Quebec to Massachusetts. Farther west, the powerful Iroquois Confederacy extended its influence toward the Adirondacks, controlling vast hunting grounds and trade routes. Then came the Europeans. In the 1600s, French explorers and fur traders pushed south from Quebec. They set up outposts along rivers and lakes that linked the region to Canada. They saw opportunity: furs, fish, timber, but not farmland. The dense forests and harsh winters kept settlements small and scattered. The English, expanding north from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, took to the coast. They settled in southern Maine and New Hampshire, but going inland was another story. Between the cold, the forests, and the resistance from native nations, their progress was slow and dangerous. For more than a century, the interior of the northern Northeast stayed wild. Later, around the 1760s, the British took control of the region. Land speculators moved in, especially in Vermont, which both New York and New Hampshire claimed as their own. The overlapping claims led to chaos, and eventually, Vermont declared itself an independent republic in 1777. For 14 years, it existed on its own until it joined the United States in 1791 as the 14th state. New Hampshire pushed inland from the coast, building towns in the valleys between its granite mountains. Maine, meanwhile, spent centuries as parts of Massachusetts. Its economy ran on timber and shipbuilding. Trees turned into masts and planks for the growing British and later American navies. And in northern New York, the Adirondacks remained a wild frontier long after the rest of the state filled up. The land was too rugged and the winters too fierce. Logging, mining, and later tourism would bring people north, but never in huge numbers. By the mid-1800s, the southern parts of New England were booming. Cities were growing, factories were humming, and immigrants were arriving in large numbers. But the northern regions stayed quiet. So as we now know, the mountains are the first big barrier. They make everything harder: travel, building, farming, and surviving winter. The soil is thin, rocky, and poor. And what's underneath isn't much better. The region doesn't have rich mineral deposits or coal seams like the Appalachians farther south. Without valuable resources to mine or easy land to farm, there wasn't much reason for settlers to stay. That was one of the reasons why the economy never took off. The empty Northeast never became a center of industry. Southern New England had rivers that powered early factories, ports connected it to global trade, and the cities attracted millions of immigrants. Northern New England and northern New York had none of that. They had lumber, granite, and paper mills, all useful, but those industries didn't create huge cities. Even today, the economy up there relies on the same resources, along with tourism. People come to hike, ski, fish, and escape city life, but most don't stay year-round. Towns fill up in summer and fall, then empty out when the snow starts falling. A few small cities, Portland, Burlington, Manchester, thrive, but there's no Boston or New York up here. You won't find massive universities, corporate headquarters, or international airports to pull in young people and families. In fact, some states have gone so far as to pay people to move there. Maine and Vermont have both launched programs offering money to remote workers who relocate. That's a pretty desperate attempt to reverse decades of population decline. Today, this empty Northeast holds just about 1% of America's population. It's a land of deep woods, icy lakes, and quiet towns. The wilderness never really left this region, but that stillness is also what makes this place so special. The rest of the Northeast is filled with constant noise and motion. Meanwhile, the North is a reminder of what the region once was: wild, cold, and untamed. That's how the heart of America's most crowded region remains one of its last true frontiers. The floor is lava! Haha, just kidding. But honestly, it's kind of falling apart. You might not feel it yet, but a huge part of North America has already lost 37 miles worth of rock from its foundation. And no, this isn't about earthquakes or giant sinkholes. It's about the continent losing pieces of the very thing that keeps the ground from wobbling around like a bad carnival ride. A team of researchers has just dropped a geological bombshell. Part of North America's ground is thinning out like a very sad, very slow ice cream drip. How do they know? They basically gave Earth a high-tech full-body MRI and created 3D maps showing how rocks once considered indestructible are now melting away into the planet's guts, like an upside-down cheese pizza inside an oven. But to really understand this mess, you first have to meet my old friends, cratons. Cratons are like the roots of the continents. They're thick, tough, and ancient. We're talking billions of years old. These bad boys survived meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, and even the tectonic movement of plates. If the plates got into fistfights, for example, you can bet we would see mountain ranges being born. If they got a divorce, drifting apart from each other, then a whole new ocean would be born. All of these things leave scars on the surface of Earth, but the cratons seem to always remain unfazed, like the cockroaches of geology. And since a craton can basically get punched in the face and feel nothing, scientists always assumed these things were nearly indestructible. But then, a group of researchers took their fancy machines to the test and realized that, wait, the cratons are falling apart? How? Enter the Farallon Plate, a really ancient tectonic plate that started to slide under North America's major plate over 100 million years ago. This is a pretty normal process, actually. It's called subduction, and it's how Earth recycles rocks and keeps itself from overheating. This subduction thing has been happening for so long that, by now, the Farallon is almost 400 miles away from the craton, sitting pretty chill at the lower mantle, weirdly close to the outer core of our planet. But the Farallon has been causing trouble, like that one roommate who moved out but keeps leaving weird stuff in the fridge. You see, as it sinks, it tugs on the bottom of North America's foundation, stretching it out and causing pieces to fall off into the deep mantle. And if that wasn't enough drama, the sinking Farallon has also leaked water and carbon dioxide into the surrounding rocks, making the craton even softer and easier to shred apart. Thanks, Farallon. Very cool of you. By studying hundreds of earthquakes across thousands of monitoring stations, scientists have confirmed the story. Big chunks of continental material are dripping downward, thinning the craton by as much as 37 miles. That's more missing rocks than can fit into a milk carton. Sounds dramatic, right? But don't worry. This is happening at a snail's pace. It'll take millions of years for anything noticeable to happen. Your great-great-great-great few grandkids from the distant future might still be standing on solid ground. But don't get too comfy. This thing may not be an urgent problem, but there's another type of sinking that's happening faster than you can say, "Help." Here's the thing. By 2050, at least 32 major cities in the US, including New York, Baltimore, and Charleston, could be partially underwater. And guess what? This one is mostly our fault. Scientists noticed that since 2007, some cities have been sinking into the ground between 0.04 and 0.08 inches every year. Charleston, in South Carolina, is pulling ahead in the worst way possible, sinking 0.15 inches annually. Sure, these numbers sound tiny and a bit ridiculous, but Charleston is barely 9 feet above sea level. And a little sinking goes a long way when the ocean is breathing down your neck. On really bad flood days, people there have to abandon their cars and basically swim home. This whole phenomenon is called land subsidence, and when you mix sinking land with rising sea levels, you get a disaster cocktail of flooded streets, salty farmland, ghost forests, and a lot of very cranky homeowners. And it doesn't stop with just homes. Infrastructure like bridges, roads, airports, and power plants, all things we rely on daily, are also at risk of serious damage. Flooded electrical grids and sunken highways could cause billions more in economic losses and create major safety hazards for communities. Now, let's be fair. Not everything is humanity's fault. Some of this trouble dates all the way back to the Ice Age. About 12,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered the northern US. They were heavy, like seriously heavy. The weight pushed the land down, and when the ice melted, the ground didn't just pop back up like a trampoline. Instead, it started playing a weird game of geological seesaw. The places that were squished started rising, and the places that weren't got pulled down. This whole process, called glacial isostatic adjustment, try to say that 3 times fast. But of course, humans found a way to make it worse. Groundwater extraction is a major culprit. Think of it like pulling the stuff out of the mattress. After a while, the whole thing just sags. In places like California's Central Valley, the land is dropping by up to 8 inches a year because we keep pumping out water during droughts. In cities like New York, the problem isn't just water. Skyscrapers themselves are making it worse. Yep, turns out if you stack millions of tons of concrete and steel onto soft ground, it tends to flatten. And in case you're wondering, the total mass of New York City's buildings is around 1.68 trillion pounds. That's about the same as 3.5 million statues of liberty piled up. With so much weight concentrated over a relatively small area, the underlying soils have no choice but to compress over time. And if you thought it couldn't get messier, think again. We've been building dams, which stop rivers from delivering fresh sediment to coastal areas. That sediment is kind of like Mother Nature's way of fluffing the ground back up. Without it, coastal lands are compacting like an old sponge. Plus, when wetlands are drained for agriculture or construction, the peaty soil dries out and collapses. Honestly, it's like the ground just can't catch a break. Scientists also noticed that the areas that used to be lush wetlands are now among the fastest sinking spots in the country, especially along the Gulf Coast. Louisiana, for example, is losing about a football field of land because of this mix of subsidence and rising seas. So what's the end game here for us regular people who just want to live above sea level? Well, it's not looking great. Ghost forests, which are basically drowned woodlands, are popping up. Farmland is turning salty and unusable. And even sunny day flooding, where streets flood without any rain, is becoming a thing. Yikes! Meanwhile, over on the West Coast, California is not exactly winning either. San Francisco and Los Angeles are both sinking, which means that rising sea levels could hit them twice as hard and twice as fast. In some places, like the Palos Verdes Peninsula, the ground has been sinking so fast, people over there might as well live like moles. So, is America turning into the next Atlantis? Probably not next week, but without serious action, like cutting back on groundwater pumping and planning smarter cities, at least 500,000 people are in serious danger. And the housing damage could easily rack up a jaw-dropping $109 billion by 2050. In the end, while North America isn't about to sink like a poorly made souffle, it's definitely showing some cracks in the crust. So maybe let's ease up on groundwater pumping, rethink how and where we build, and invest a little more in keeping our feet dry. After all, if the floor really does become lava someday, we're gonna wish we had at least fixed the leaks first. This area might just be the most important spot in America right now, as it is worth over $1 trillion. There's something incredibly valuable hidden right here at Thacker Pass, and it is going to shake things up, not just in Nevada, but in the US economy and its global relations. The McDermott Caldera is a massive area, about 28 miles long by 22 miles wide, stretching across northern Nevada and southern Oregon. It's in Humboldt County, a quiet, rural place with just one main city that's going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. That's because they found white gold there. We're talking about lithium. And to explain why this metal is so important, we need a scale. On one side, we place a chunk of lithium, and on the other, an apple. What do you think will happen? If both have the same volume, the scale is going to tip toward the apple. That's because lithium is super light. Its density is about 0.3 ounces per cubic inch, which makes it the lightest solid you can find at room temperature. Lithium is also extremely reactive. That means it combines with other elements very easily, and it can catch fire just as easily. Mix it with water, fire. Expose it to air, yep, fire again. But when you combine its lightness with its high reactivity, you get a material that's perfect for batteries. Like the one powering your smartphone, laptop, or even your electric car. Nevada's been hiding this treasure for about 16 million years. The McDermott Caldera used to be a volcanic hotspot, spewing molten rock and creating a huge lake filled with mineral-rich waters. Over time, that lake dried up, leaving behind thick layers of clay loaded with lithium. Right now, Thacker Pass Mine is sitting on one of the biggest untapped lithium reserves in the world, worth about $1.5 trillion. If everything goes as planned, they expect it to produce about 40,000 tons of high-quality lithium a year. And that's enough to make batteries for up to 800,000 electric cars. Like I mentioned earlier, this metal is the backbone of modern batteries. And with the world racing toward green energy, the demand for lithium is skyrocketing. Since 2020, its price has gone up more than 10 times, making it the most expensive battery metal in the world. That means it's way more expensive than magnesium, nickel, cobalt, and other materials used in rechargeable batteries. Right now, we're using about 1.16 million tons of lithium per year, and roughly 85% of it goes into making batteries, mostly for cars. Between 2030 and 2040, experts think we will need to double the money we're putting into production from $94 billion to $188 billion. At the same time, investment in batteries will jump by over 200%, reaching $686 billion. Finally, by 2050, the demand for lithium is expected to be more than 10 times higher than what we're producing now. Sorry, I know that's a lot of numbers, but I just want to show how important Thacker Pass will be for the whole world. This mine is going to be key to keeping everything running. I mean, literally, since most of the future demand will be for things like cars, electric bikes, scooters, and renewable energy storage. Nevada could also be the epicenter of a global energy revolution, with the US aiming to cut pollution by 50% by 2030. A big part of that is replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric ones. And to make that happen, America is going to need a whole lot more lithium than it's producing right now. Nowadays, most of the metal used in the United States come from countries like Chile and Argentina. So if America wants to be a leader in this market, it really needs to invest more and more in projects like Thacker Pass. But there's another challenge. Finding lithium in a mine is one thing, but refining it is another story. Just like diamonds are carefully cut and shaped to bring out their sparkle and sold in rings and necklaces, something similar needs to be done with lithium. The raw material that comes from the mines has to be refined into a pure form that can actually be used in things like batteries. And China pretty much dominates this part of the market, and they're responsible for about 75% of global lithium-ion battery production. In other words, it doesn't matter if a country finds this powerful metal on its land, it will probably still need China to help refine it. So, the US is eager to strengthen its supply chain. In fact, they're so excited about this possibility that authorities have invested over $2 billion in loans into the Nevada project. Because of that, Thacker Pass could make the US a leader in lithium production worldwide. If their estimates are right, the McDermott caldera could hold nearly half of the world's known lithium reserves. It would almost double the reserves found in Bolivia's salt flats, for example, which used to hold the record for the world's largest deposit. This discovery is about to change Humboldt County for good. Those quiet streets surrounded by nature will never feel the same again. The mine will need about 2,000 workers who will probably move there from other cities. Those workers will need houses, hospitals, schools for their kids, and all the necessary services. Do you see how it's like a ripple effect? For every person hired to work on the project during construction, 6 more people will get hired in the state to support them. Thacker Pass is also going to have a huge impact on the economy, not just in Nevada, but all across the country. People expect the mine to be active for 35 years, and each year it's expected to generate over $2 billion. But here's the thing. In Thacker Pass, they'll be extracting lithium from clay, and this process has never been done on such a huge scale before. So it's kind of a hit or miss. But if it works, it could completely change the industry. Big question. Who's interested in all this? Well, we've got 3 big companies eyeing the lithium market in the US. First, there's ExxonMobil. The oil giant wants to start producing lithium by 2027, and they have plans to become the top supplier for electric vehicles by 2030. Then there's General Motors, the company behind big car brands like Chevrolet and Cadillac. They're so interested in this business that they agreed to pay $625 million for a 38% stake in Thacker Pass. And finally, Tesla. In 2023, they started building a factory in Texas to process lithium. It's all part of their plan to handle more of their supply chain themselves. Now that you know how important lithium is, you might be wondering, what if we run out? Well, that could happen, since it comes from mining and, just like gold, is a finite resource. But that doesn't mean we'd have to give up smartphones or electric cars. If we ever run out of this metal, we'd probably find new ways to produce batteries. In fact, some experts think thermal batteries could be the next big thing. They store extra energy from renewable resources like wind or solar power, which are very cheap. So they represent a new way of storing energy at a small fraction of the cost. Nowadays, they're primarily used for powering the production of steel, cement, and chemicals. Thermal batteries are also being used to heat and cool large buildings. However, more and more projects are focusing on bringing this technology into private spaces, like houses and apartments. Experts are optimistic that initiatives like these could make thermal batteries as well known as electric batteries, and they might soon become a regular part of our daily lives.
So it turns out that you can't drive between South America and North America, and there's a simple reason for that. There are no roads connecting the two continents, not even a rudimentary one. Technically, you could try your luck crossing on foot, but let me tell you, that would be a huge mistake. The region that connects the two continents is called the Darian Gap. It stretches across southern Panama's Darian province and the northern part of Colombia. The only land route there is a 60-mile jungle trek. Crossing it can take anywhere from 3 to 10 days. It depends on weather conditions, how much you're carrying, and honestly, just pure luck. Chance plays a big role here, because this isn't some chill, relaxing nature walk. It's a harsh, extreme environment, known for being completely isolated and one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Still, people seem to forget that and go there anyway. Every year, the number of people crossing just keeps growing. In 2014, fewer than 10,000 people crossed the gap. In 2023, that number increased to 520,000. Now, you might be wondering, what are so many people doing in the middle of the two American continents, risking all that danger? Well, that's because the Darian Gap has become a route for refugees migrating to North America. But to get there, they face all kinds of dangers, from insect bites and infections to serious fractures. We're talking about a no-man's land. Since there are no police stations, immigrants must also watch out for thieves. Along the way, they have no choice but to rely on and support each other. Most people start the crossing with at least a tent or tarp, rain boots, water, and some food. But these things get heavy fast, and people normally can't carry enough supplies for the entire journey. At some point, people start drinking river water to avoid dehydration. But the water's full of bacteria and dirt, so it causes intestinal issues. And if things get serious, there's no medical help there. To make this whole scenario even worse, the temperatures are brutal, often hitting over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a small subset of people who venture through the Darian Gap are hardcore adventurers and travelers looking for a survival experience in the jungle. But this region is no place for a relaxing vacation. A group of tourists who went there in 2023 ended up getting jungle rot, a fungus that affects the feet. The situation got so bad that a woman had to be carried out by the group on the last day because she couldn't walk. No matter how prepared people are for the Darian Gap, in the end, survival mostly comes down to luck. Out there, travelers won't find cities with solid infrastructure where they can crash at a hotel and gear up for the next day. In some spots, they might stumble across basic camps right in the jungle. These camps might offer wooden platforms for tents, bucket showers, toilets, and even plates of chicken and rice. But it all comes at a price. Wi-Fi, for example, might cost $2 an hour, and that seems like a pretty good deal, considering there's no cell phone service on the trail. They pretty much lose all contact with the outside world. Now picture a dense rainforest with steep, muddy terrain. The hiking trail is littered with boulders and tangled with vines, like nature's own tripwires. It climbs sharply over a mountain, becoming a serious challenge even for someone in good physical shape. The area also gets constant heavy rainfall, which can lead to landslides, flash flooding, and extremely muddy conditions. The situation gets so intense that even the t-shirts and faces of those who make the crossing end up covered in mud. They'll also have to cross a lot of fast-moving rivers. A Venezuelan dad who recently went through the area with his 2 kids said their sneakers ripped apart on the very first day. That's how powerful the rivers can be. And they're deep, too. Sometimes the water reaches all the way up to their shoulders. But the dangers in that area aren't recent. For centuries, the Darian Gap was thought to be impossible to cross. The first Europeans who ventured into Latin America saw it as kind of a jungle training school. They totally knew about its dangers, but still, many adventurers tried to make the crossing in the years that followed. In 1854, for example, an expedition disappeared for 49 days in the jungle, battling starvation and exhaustion. Then again, in 1870, a group of 100 men set out to cross it. Even though they were well prepared and carried cutting-edge equipment for the time, they still suffered tremendously during the journey. They had to rely on incredible resilience to survive the challenge. Over the years, people who ventured in often ended up passing away from hunger, thirst, and even drowning in rivers. They also faced the risk of being attacked by dangerous animals like jaguars, white-lipped pecaries, and the fer-de-lance, a fast, irritable snake that is one of the most venomous out there. The area is also swarming with mosquitoes, which can spread serious health problems. Leaning against trees to rest can also be risky. This jungle is full of spiked chunga palm trees, which are covered in long black spines up to 8 inches long. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. Just brush against a chunga, and you could end up with infected wounds. And yet another danger is getting lost in the dense forest and never finding your way back to safety. These days, though, this risk is a lot lower. Some people have mentioned color-coded markers that help guide travelers and keep them from going the wrong way. If they see blue or green fabric tied to trees, it means keep walking. But if they spot red fabric, that's a sign they're going the wrong way and need to turn around quickly. Since there are so many dangers, why not just build a road through the Darian Gap? While it might seem like a good idea, building a road connecting Panama and Colombia isn't really that simple. The Darian Gap has a humid climate, tough terrain, and constant rainfall, which means any attempt to build a functional road would be highly challenging and super expensive. Even though there have been previous attempts to fill in the gap. See, there's a huge road system called the Pan-American Highway, which stretches all the way from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. Nowadays, this highway hits a roadblock right at the Darian Gap. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, as the original idea was for the road to go through there. Leaders from Latin American countries tried to make this plan happen in the 70s, and then again in the 90s. But a lot of people were against it, mainly because they wanted to protect the local communities and the rainforest. Since the Darian Gap is mostly untouched by humans, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's believed that 1 in 5 species are endemic to the region, meaning they only exist in that specific area, like the Darian pocket gopher and the slatty slender mouse opossum. A road would have really damaged the ecosystem in the area, so the plans were scrapped. Eventually, an alternative was created to travel by sea. At least 2 companies started a ferry service connecting the 2 countries. However, the business wasn't profitable, and they ended up shutting down. Not long ago, Panama decided to close the Darian Gap route. Now they're sealed off with barbed wire fencing. It might just be a matter of time before other routes are created. But if you are an adventurer looking to visit South America, it's probably not best to wait for that. Traveling by plane to Colombia will always be a much safer option.
Some mistakes have the power to change the course of history. One such story has to do with an old, boring key that could have saved the Titanic from its infamous demise. The key belonged to the crow's nest locker that housed binoculars, which could have helped the lookouts spot the iceberg sooner. There's more. The key wasn't even on board the ship when it set sail. The second officer took it with him when he was taken off the ship at the last minute. As the story goes, the officer forgot to hand the key over to his replacement in his hurry to disembark. So, when the lookouts were in desperate need of binoculars, they were out of luck. One of the lookouts, named Fred Fleet, even testified that if they had had binoculars, they would have spotted the iceberg in time to avoid it. And when asked how much sooner, Fleet replied, "Enough to get out of the way." In 2015, some auctioneers got their hands on Blair's key and presented it as one of the most important artifacts from the Titanic. They truly believed it could have saved the ship. Blair kept the key as a souvenir and passed it down to his daughter, Nancy. At one point, it was up for auction with a price tag of over $80,000. Blair himself was quite the hero, it seems. A year after the Titanic disaster, he was awarded a gallantry medal for saving a crewman who had fallen overboard while he had been on board the liner Majestic. He may have forgotten a key, but he sure didn't forget to be a hero when it counted. This next story is both funny and tragic. It's about NASA's lost $125 million Mars Climate Orbiter. The spacecraft engineers failed to convert from English to metric measurements before the craft was launched, and as a result, they lost it. The navigation team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory used the metric system of millimeters and meters, while Lockheed Martin Astronautics in Denver used the English system of inches, feet, and pounds. JPL engineers mistook acceleration readings measured in English units of pound-seconds for a metric measure of force called Newton-seconds. What's worse is that none of JPL's quality control procedures caught the error in the 9 months it took the spacecraft to make its 461 million-mile flight to Mars. That's a long time to be lost in translation, don't you think? The miscalculations were enough to throw the spacecraft so far off track that it flew too deeply into the Martian atmosphere and was destroyed when it entered its initial orbit around Mars. It's embarrassing to lose a spacecraft to such a simple math error. And it's hard to think of another example of such a large loss due to English versus metric confusion. Ever heard about the mathematical mistake that led to the discovery of the New World? Spoiler alert, it involves a guy named Christopher Columbus and a really big globe. Back in 1492, Columbus set sail from Spain with a mission to find a new trade route to Asia. He was convinced that he was less than 3,000 miles away from Japan, and just a bit more sailing would get him to the Indies with all their tasty spices. The only problem was that Columbus was a bit off in his calculations, like way off. He made a mistake in estimating the size of the globe, which led him to believe that Earth was far smaller than it actually is. Now I know what you're thinking. Wasn't Columbus afraid that he would fall off the edge of the world? Contrary to popular myth, Columbus and his crew knew the Earth was a globe, just like the ancient Greeks did 2 millennia earlier. They weren't worried about falling off the edge, but rather about the size of the ocean they planned on crossing. And to make matters worse, Columbus had no idea that an unknown landmass existed between Spain and Asia. After weeks at sea, Columbus finally reached the Caribbean. He believed that he had landed on the outskirts of Asia, and so named the islands the West Indies. He went on to explore the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America. But here's where things get really interesting. Even though Columbus insisted until his last day that he had reached Asia, another Italian explorer named Amerigo Vespucci mapped the eastern shore of South America down to Brazil and proved conclusively that Columbus had actually discovered a whole new world. A German mapmaker saw Amerigo's maps and labeled the new landmass America after him. And since his maps were super popular at the time, the name stuck. One man named Alexander Fleming stumbled upon one of the most significant medical discoveries of all time by accident. At one point in his career, Fleming observed the demise of many people from uncontrollable infections. Antiseptics were used to fight this, but they often did more harm than good. In 1922, while he had a cold himself, Fleming transferred some of his, nasal discharge to a petri dish and left it on his cluttered desk. When he finally examined it weeks later, he found that an enzyme had some antimicrobial properties. It wasn't until 1928, when Fleming left an uncovered petri dish next to an open window, that he stumbled upon the discovery that would change the world. The dish became contaminated with fungus spores. And when he examined them under the microscope, Fleming discovered that the bacteria near the fungus were dying. He managed to isolate the fungus and found that it was effective against numerous things that caused diseases. And thus, penicillin was discovered. As Fleming himself put it, "I did not discover penicillin. Nature did that. I only discovered it by accident." Talk about a lucky break. In the early 1520s, the east coast of the United States of America was a big mystery waiting to be solved. The Spanish found Florida, and the English and Portuguese found Newfoundland, but the area in between was like a blank spot on the map. France decided to take action and sent an expedition to explore the area. They chose a guy called Giovanni da Verrazzano to lead the trip. For this expedition, he got 4 ships. Unfortunately, 2 of them were shipwrecked, and a third one went home after doing some other business on the Spanish coast. Only the flagship, La Dauphine, crossed the Atlantic with Verrazzano and his 50-man crew. Verrazzano set sail from Madeira and landed at Cape Fear. From there, he sailed south, but got a little scared of running into the Spanish, so he returned somewhere north of Charleston. He anchored not far from his original landing spot, but unlike other explorers, he preferred to anchor well out at sea. He did send a boat to the shore, and he met the natives. They were described as wearing just some animal skins covering their bodies and garlands of bird feathers. As Verrazzano sailed along the coast, he reached the outer banks of North Carolina. He thought that the waters he discovered were those of the Pacific. In reality, what he'd stumbled upon was the Pamlico Sound. He thought that North America was just a long, extremely narrow strip of land. This mistake led mapmakers to show North America as almost completely divided in two. Moving on, Verrazzano reached a beautiful place that he called Arcadia, probably Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Sailing further north, he missed the entrances to Chesapeake and Delaware Bays because he kept quite far from the coast until New Jersey. Then, the moment we've all been waiting for, Verrazzano discovered New York Harbor, and he anchored in the Narrows. Later, it was named after him, and now it is spanned by the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. Once Verrazzano's sea appeared on the map, it became widely accepted and impacted loads of future explorers. For example, Henry Hudson went looking for a passage to the Pacific in the middle latitudes of the continent. But, as it turns out, the Englishman never did find the Pacific Ocean anywhere near Virginia. And the cartographic myth eventually faded away. It's funny to think about how a mistaken belief could have such an impact on history.
So stargazers were chasing the Perseid meteor shower, but instead, they got something more unusual and rare, a massive cosmic swirl in the sky. In August 2025, reports poured in from Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Ohio, Nebraska, a total of at least 10 states, and Ontario, Canada. The ghostly spiral was floating over the highways, houses, and woods for almost 10 minutes before vanishing like a Penn and Teller trick. It bloomed, unfurled, and then just faded. The internet went nuts about the mysterious spiral. Witnesses snapped video with shaky hands, wondering what they just saw. And of course, theories bloom faster than wildflowers in spring. Some people thought it must have been a Perseid meteor. It all happened smack in the middle of the season for those shooting stars. But meteors blaze bright and fast, and this was slow, hypnotic, and weirdly beautiful. Then a rocket theory took hold. The United Launch Alliance's Vulcan from Florida was a prime suspect. But the geometry didn't add up, as that rocket headed east, not the Midwest. The timing and path just didn't align. Finally, the European dark horse entered the spotlight, Ariane 6. They launched this rocket with a weather satellite on it from French Guiana just minutes earlier. Some astronomers mentioned that it probably released frozen exhaust high in the atmosphere during its cleanup phase. That spinning fuel cloud could have caught the sunlight just right, creating a spiral that drifted in the upper atmosphere. People were able to see it for a good stretch before dissipation. What we do know is that the physics behind what we witnessed are normally part of the twilight phenomenon. As the upper stage of a rocket starts spinning in space, it dumps leftover fuel. In the upper atmosphere, that fuel instantly turns into ice crystals that scatter sunlight and form a spiral that looks like something spun straight out of a fantasy novel. It's totally natural and doesn't have to do with extraterrestrial civilizations like some people thought. Still, nothing's confirmed, but there are more similar glowing structures lately, mostly from SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets. That's why they even have a nickname, SpaceX Spirals. In March 2025, a glowing swirl formed above Europe like a neon whirlpool, or the Milky Way got into a blender. The blue spiral stretched and spun steadily for about 8 to 12 minutes above the UK and further into Sweden, Poland, Hungary, and Croatia. The sponsor of this sky show was a Falcon 9 rocket that had launched from Cape Canaveral earlier that day. Once the rocket reached space, it dumped leftover fuel that froze into ice crystals, and people got to enjoy an amazing sight. Now, normally, SpaceX spirals come in a perfect vortex shape, but the one that appeared over Europe in 2024 had two faint, horn-like pillars of light. It's the only horn spiral we've seen so far. It photobombed the auroras over countries like Poland, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic. Earlier that evening, a Falcon 9 rocket launched from California's Vandenberg Air Force Base, carrying Earth-observing satellites. Another layer to the story is that there was a strong G3-level geomagnetic storm happening at the same time, thanks to a coronal mass ejection that crashed into Earth's magnetic field earlier that day. That storm pumped up the northern lights, which became the stage backdrop for the spiral's eerie entrance. Another SpaceX spiral example is from April 2023. Over Alaska, people who went out to watch the northern lights suddenly froze as a glowing blue spiral swirled into view. It was drifting across skies like someone had opened a portal to another dimension. Cameras caught it, social media went wild, and Stargate in the sky was suddenly trending. But as it turned out, the portal was no invitation from the Milky Way, but the aftermath of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Frozen exhaust spun in the upper atmosphere and reflected sunlight in a perfect corkscrew pattern, framed against shimmering auroras. The science was straightforward, but the sight was straight out of a science fiction film. Now, spirals aren't the only kind of weird atmospheric shows nature throws for us. In Italy in 2023, a massive red ring of light suddenly flashed high above a storm. Scientists identified it as an ELF, a type of transient luminous event. When a lightning bolt unleashes a powerful electromagnetic pulse, it slams into the ionosphere's nitrogen and creates a glowing red disk hundreds of miles across. The phenomenon lasted only milliseconds, but thanks to time-lapse cameras, it burned into memory like the outline of an extraterrestrial saucer. Normally, only satellites orbiting the Earth can spot ELVs, but in this case, the lightning bolt was at least 10 times more powerful than regular ones, so it was visible to humans on Earth. Another cool thing about it is that it looked like it was hanging in the sky, directly above the town of Posigno. But in reality, the massive halo appeared above central Italy and part of the Adriatic Sea. It was just a forced perspective that made it look like it was in a completely different space. You can only get the best view of some sky shows directly from space. Aboard the International Space Station, orbiting 250 miles above Earth, astronauts once reported seeing two mysterious blue blobs glowing beneath them. From orbit, they looked like deep-sea creatures that had been misplaced in the sky. two radiant orbs pulsing against the blackness of space. It turned out that one blob was a massive lightning strike somewhere in the Gulf of Thailand. You can't normally spot those from the ISS as clouds hide them. But this one strike occurred next to a large circular gap in the top of the clouds, and the lightning illuminated the surrounding walls of the cloudy caldera-like structure. The second glowing blue blob was the moon playing tricks with light. Because of where the moon was lined up with the International Space Station, the sunlight it reflected had to pass through Earth's atmosphere before reaching the astronauts' cameras. And when light hit the atmosphere, things got funky. Tiny particles floating in our air, like dust, water, and other stuff, scattered light in different ways. Not all colors of light behave the same, though. Each color has a different wavelength. Blue light waves are the shortest of the bunch, which makes them the easiest to scatter in all directions. So, when moonlight passes through our atmosphere, the blue part of that light spreads out the most. That's why the moon looked like a fuzzy blue blob with a halo instead of its usual white glow. It's the same reason the sky looks blue during the day. Sunlight hits our Earth's atmosphere, and the blue wavelengths scatter way more than the reds or yellows. Our eyes pick up that scattered blue light and boom, blue sky. So basically, the ISS astronauts weren't seeing a new phenomenon. They were seeing the same science that makes summer skies look so bright. Only this time, the moon got the blue makeover. Then, residents of Newburyport, Massachusetts, saw a fire rainbow pop up out of nowhere on June 2, 2024. Now, technically, it's called a circumhorizontal arc, and it happens when sunlight hits ice crystals high in the clouds at just the right angle, bending into a slice of rainbow that looks like it's flaming across the sky. It's all about timing and angles. The sun needs to be over 58 degrees high, and you need cirrus clouds or jet contrails carrying ice crystals. Light passes through the crystals, splits, and suddenly, boom, a rainbow in the clouds, usually just peeking through gaps. It's not just Massachusetts. In Weatherford, Texas, on April 15, 2025, jellyfish clouds called virga did the same thing. Ice was falling but never hitting the ground, creating a floating rainbow halo. And on April 25, 2024, in Ohio, photographers caught the crystals scattering light into perfect rainbow colors again. So, next time you're outside, keep your eyes peeled. Mother Nature loves to show off, and sometimes she paints the sky on fire. In 1994, the Sherman family bought a small ranch in the state of Utah, 150 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. A spacious house, beautiful nature, a starry sky. One night, Terry Sherman heard a strange noise coming from the outside. He went out of the house and saw a huge wolf. He had never seen a wolf of this size. Terry chased the animal away and ran after it, but the wolf's tracks were lost. It was as if it had disappeared into thin air. This was just one of the many creepy and strange cases that occurred at Skinwalker Ranch. The land where the farm is located used to be inhabited by the Ute people. In the past, they clashed with the Navajo, who, according to legend, sent skinwalkers on them. According to locals, a skinwalker is an evil witch who can take the form of any animal or human. There are rumors that skinwalkers still wander in this area. Perhaps the Sherman family saw one of them, but it's not that important. The fact is that the appearance of the huge wolf was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, the family reported strange flashes of light, mysterious objects in the sky, crop circles, and mysterious voices that seemed to hover overhead. But the worst thing was the damage to livestock. The Sherman family, fortunately, acted contrary to all the cliches of horror movies. In 1996, they sold the cottage to Robert Bigelow, a man who had a lot of money and was interested in buying this particular ranch. But why? Because Robert Bigelow was a fan of strange, unusual phenomenon. He founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDSI, and the area where Skinwalker Ranch is located had been the center of attraction for creepy things. Since the 1950s, there have been hundreds of reports of mysterious objects in the sky in this region. And no, those are not your typical round flying saucers. People talked about different bright lights that took the form of doorways or portals. So, Robert Bigelow and his NIDSheet reported on glowing figures and animal diseases. But over the years of research, they could not provide any reliable evidence of the existence of something extraordinary. People saw all those strange phenomena, but their equipment didn't catch anything. So it all looked like a big hoax. But in 2016, something interesting happened. Skinwalker Ranch was sold to an anonymous buyer. 4 years later, the new owner did something no one had done before. Now imagine how cool it would be if all the strange phenomena were recorded not on old video cameras with poor quality, but on cool equipment with high-resolution video recording, powerful microphones, thermal imagers, and sensors. And what if you could also watch a live broadcast using this equipment? Well, that's exactly what the new rancher did. His name is Brandon Fugel, a real estate mogul from Utah. He not only bought the ranch, but also signed a contract with the History Channel to create a show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. The point of this project is to apply a scientific approach to unexplained phenomena. To do this, he turned the ranch into a big reality show that's been running for 5 years. The first thing Brandon Fugel stated was that there would be no falsifications, fakes, or computer graphics. No show exploring strange phenomena can compare with this one in terms of realism and authenticity. Fugel uses thermographic imaging systems, plane transponder data receivers, magnetometers, special cameras that detect infrared radiation and convert it to images, and other complicated scientific equipment. He shares all the data with the audience and allows the most devoted fans of the show to monitor 50 cameras with microphones installed throughout the territory live at any moment. For money, of course. Membership in the Skinwalker Ranch Insiders program starts at $8 per month. During the entire existence of the show, more than 10,000 people have signed up. Participants can not only watch the ranch through cameras, but also rotate them and zoom in and out. In addition to cameras and thermal imagers, Fugel launched special lasers into the sky that reflect off any surface. If the sky is clear, the lasers go far up. If there's an object, the lasers reflect off it. In one of the episodes, they used this equipment to detect something flying and invisible. Fugel also said that he had seen strange flying objects with his own eyes. Skinwalker Ranch turned out to be a real twilight zone for him. Now one day, the camera footage showed one of the doors slam shut. Just like that, without any wind. Other terrible phenomena are connected with livestock. Animals often get hurt, and many of them simply don't survive. And there are loads of such strange, unexplained cases. Each episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is dedicated to a phenomenon and its exploration. But has expensive equipment helped to unravel any secrets or prove the existence of extraterrestrial or mystical forces? If this had been confirmed, the whole world would probably already know about it. Therefore, at the moment, it's just an interesting show for fans of mysterious phenomena. There's no direct evidence of the existence of anything unusual there. But, at the same time, there's no explanation for many creepy things. The show offers a huge scope for speculation and research. Local folklore, flying objects, strange voices, not unlike mine, and many unexplained phenomena are all in one place. If all these stories are true, why are they happening exactly in this area? There are a lot of theories, but let's look at a few of the most popular ones. The first and most obvious one. Imagine that you have a popular show that makes you money. People watch it only because it shows mysterious, inexplicable things. But what if there's an explanation? In this case, the popularity of the show will drop and you'll lose money. It's logical, but why would a real estate mogul with a fortune of several $1 billion deceive people? Besides, if you watch some episodes, you'll see that Fugel is truly passionate about this project. One of the most popular theories is about visitors from other planets. After all, we have glowing flying objects, bright lights in the sky, electrical interferences, and the ability to elude camera lenses. Also, some believe that an unknown object is hidden in the mountain, located next to the ranch. What if it's a spaceship that crashed there millions of years ago and was swallowed by the mountain? It may be emitting bizarre radiation that drives animals crazy and causes hallucinations in humans. A popular but a rather banal version. Let's move on. The next theory is similar to the previous one, but instead of guests from another planet, it speaks about guests from another dimension. Ooh. Meet the multiverse version. Some unknown creatures from another reality come here, explore this ranch, and leave. This theory explains why some flying objects in the sky look like portals. Those portals may cause malfunctions in electrical appliances. There's one weak point in this theory. Why do these portals appear on the lonely ranch and nowhere else? A strange choice of travel for the residents of other dimensions. Now, the most likely theory belongs to a neuroscientist who claims that all the oddities on the ranch are connected to the geophysical force of the planet. Seismic activity, geomagnetic fields, and shifts in tectonic plates can affect some parts of the human brain responsible for hallucinations. Electromagnetic forces can also affect the stable operation of electrical appliances. So, perhaps all the oddities of this place are the result of increased seismic activity. Glowing lights, giant wolves that leave no footprints, and voices in the air can be a massive hallucination. But if this is true, why doesn't anything similar happen in other places with seismic activity? This idea leads to another theory related to electromagnetic interference. This phenomenon incapacitates batteries, drones, microphones, video cameras, and other equipment. Perhaps it affects the human brain too. But what about those poor affected animals? There are still too many unanswered questions, so stay tuned.
See how the Antarctic Peninsula looks just like South America, but upside down? This isn't just a coincidence. It's the ghost of a 30-million-year-old breakup. These continents were once connected, but their divorce gave birth to an ocean current so powerful it was capable of completely freezing Antarctica and shaping its landscape. Here's how it went down. Tectonic plates pulled a sneaky move and cracked open a ridiculously narrow passage in the ocean, about only 500 miles wide, forcing 4.5 trillion cubic feet of water to flow inside this geological straw. This was the birth of an ocean current stronger than the Amazon River. This ocean current, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, by the way, flows in a circular motion, going clockwise because of the strong winds that blow over there. This circular motion around Antarctica caused erosion, shaping the landmass of the continent into a circle, except for that stubborn peninsula, which is being slowly dragged east like a kid refusing to leave a playground. Wait, South America and Antarctica used to be one? Yep, a long time ago. South America, Australia, and Antarctica were all part of a supercontinent called Gondwana, which also included Africa at some point. Back then, South America and Antarctica used to be basically joined at the hip by a land bridge called the Antarctic Land Bridge, which just so happened to be a lush green forest and also a great dinosaur highway. Yeah, you heard it right. Dinosaurs. A 95-million-year-old dino, whose name I can't pronounce, sorry, was discovered in Australia, and scientists found out it had actually been a distant cousin of Argentina's Sarmientosaurus. Same jaw, same chiseled teeth, same everything. These guys were like identical twins, separated by an ocean. How? Because back then, Antarctica wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a temperate rainforest, like Oregon, making it a pretty nice travel route for a dino family. But the land bridge wasn't just for dinosaurs. About 40 million years ago, the ancestors of Australia's marsupials waddled to the land down under all the way from South America, taking the Antarctica route, another proof that these continents used to be connected. Things remained somewhat peaceful for the dinos and the marsupials until Earth's ground started moving. This is what a German scientist called the Continental drift theory, back in 1912. Our German friend here basically looked at the coast of South America and went, "Hey, this looks like it could fit into the coast of Africa." Like a scientific Sherlock Holmes, he noticed what others had overlooked for centuries. The continents were clearly pieces of a larger puzzle. And he was right. Here's the deal. Planet Earth is made of many layers of rocks and metals, like a cosmic onion. The outermost layer, the lithosphere, is divided into pretty solid tectonic plates that move atop a layer of softer, somewhat molten rocks, like slippery ice. This is why the plates move. In fact, they've been rearranging Earth's face for billions of years, with supercontinents forming and breaking apart in cycles, like a slow-motion game of bumper cars. This movement might be pretty slow since most tectonic plates only move 0 to 3.9 inches every year, except for the Nazca plate, racing ahead at 7.8 inches, about as fast as your hair grows. But don't let their snail's pace fool you. These shifting slabs are the ultimate planet shapers. Their slow dance gives us everything from earthquakes that build mountains, like the Himalayas, to rifts that birth oceans, like the Atlantic. All because the oceanic crust is dense and sinks like a stone, while continental crust floats like a cork. It's this density difference that explains why continents exist at all. Without it, Earth would be completely covered by shallow seas. This slow-motion planetary renovation project is exactly what tore South America and Antarctica apart 30 million years ago. The plates under these continents started to drift apart in a process called crustal extension. It's like the lithosphere was pizza dough being slowly stretched until it thins and splits. As the crust stretched, it became thinner and weaker, eventually cracking like the surface of a drying lake bed. This whole thing gave birth to a new tectonic plate, the Scotia Plate, that emerged between South America and Antarctica, like a geological divorce lawyer. For a while, parts of this plate stayed above water as the last gasp of the Antarctic land bridge. It was Earth's version of that one thread still connecting your hoodie after the zipper breaks. These final connections might have persisted as chains of islands, but just like that fraying hoodie, the connection couldn't last forever. Eventually, this small but mighty plate became the final nail in the coffin of the land bridge connecting the two continents. Just like all the tectonic plates, this one was also on the move. As it expanded eastward, it opened a new passage of water called the Drake Passage, slowly covering the Antarctic land bridge with ocean water. The process was like pulling open elevator doors. At first, just a crack, then wider and wider until the connection was completely broken. This geographical divorce had chilling consequences. The new Drake Passage allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to form, creating an endless loop of cold water that isolated Antarctica, shaped its land, and even cooled the entire planet. This current acts like a wall around Antarctica, blocking warm water and invasive species while regulating global climate. Eventually, Antarctica turned into an icebox that is 98% covered in ice sheets, and that holds about 61% of Earth's fresh water. Nowadays, this continent holds the title of the windiest, driest, and iciest place on Earth. It's a frozen desert where temperatures plunge below -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your breath mid-air. A layer of ice there can be more than a mile thick, and it expands even further in winter to cover an area larger than the continental United States. Today, if you want to travel to Antarctica, the quickest sea route is through the Drake Passage, a 500-mile-wide body of water that is narrow enough for the winds to scream across thousands of miles, transforming into monstrous waves that can tower up to 49 feet, though calm days create waves only 13 to 16 feet high. Still twice as tall as Atlantic waves, mind you. This is probably why sailors call this stretch of ocean the Drake Shake. But tectonic movement isn't just about shifting continents. It's Earth's ultimate life support system. You see, about half of our planet's heat comes from radioactive decay in the core. Thanks, uranium-235. Something like nature's nuclear reactor. This heat is behind everything from volcanoes to the very plate motion that once connected Antarctica to South America. And it only comes out of the core because of tectonic movement. Without this internal heat engine, Earth would be just like Mars. When the plates move and release heat, they also release CO2 gases into the atmosphere, regulating the temperature of our planet. And when the plates move underwater, they take a lot of this CO2 back to Earth's interior, recycling all this gas. This is why the plates can change our air, climate, and even the evolution of life itself just by moving around. But billions of years ago, these plates were not moving around. Back then, it was like Earth was wearing a solid ceramic shell with many cracks. But even without tectonic movement, the heat managed to escape through these cracks in a process called stagnant lid tectonics, kickstarting all life on Earth. And no, tectonic movement is not a thing of the past. Earthquakes are the living proof that it is not just happening today, but might repeat again on a more dramatic scale in the future. You see, to form supercontinents like Pangaea, smaller megacontinents have to dive beneath another. And scientists predict that a similar process might create a new supercontinent called Pangaea Proxima in 250 million years. By then, humans might be extinct or living on Mars, but Earth's tectonic dance will continue, even without us. Not bad for something that moves more slowly than a traffic jam. Turns out, Antarctica and South America used to be BFFs before all that tectonic drama split them up, like a messy breakup that literally froze one of them out. Now, they just awkwardly mirror each other from across the Drake Passage. Classic exes.
Consider South America and Africa. Don't they kind of look like they fit together, like puzzle pieces? Well, they actually did. But about 130 million years ago, South America was like, bye, and slowly started drifting away. These days, it's around 1,800 miles from Africa, and it's still on the move. Every year, the continent shifts a little more toward the Pacific Ocean. So, how's that even happening? Tectonic plates are constantly moving. That's what makes the Earth's surface shift over time, going from this to what we see today. But those movements happen so slowly that you and I can't see them go. So, no, Brazilians or Chileans aren't out there feeling their continent inching westward. But the numbers don't lie. South America is moving, and apparently all it wants is to get as far away as possible from this massive underwater mountain range called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But what exactly is pushing the land toward the Pacific Ocean? It is the heat inside our planet. Way down beneath the ocean, there are cracks in the Earth's crust, and magma, super hot melted rock, rises up through those cracks. When that happens, the magma cools and hardens into solid rock. Over time, this process might build underwater mountains, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And as more new crust forms, it begins to push the older crust out of the way. In the process, tectonic plates and the continents riding on top of them get pushed along. Now, on the other side of South America, over by the Pacific, there is the Nazca Plate. It's heavier and it's moving eastward. Since it is denser, it is sliding underneath the South American Plate. This entire process is called subduction, and it's happening at a rate of about 3 inches per year. By the way, the collision between these two plates is what's behind all those breathtaking volcanoes scattered throughout the Andes, and it's also making the continent move. So, if everything goes according to plan, projections show that South America will end up more centered in the Pacific Ocean in the future. But some models suggest something way crazier. Before we get into that, though, we need to clear something up. Why on earth isn't Africa following in South America's footsteps? I mean, shouldn't it be drifting west too? Well, not quite. Africa is doing its own thing because it sits on the African plate. So the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is located between those two continents, and just like it pushes the South American plate, it also pushes the African plate, but in the opposite direction. It's like this ridge is trying to split up two ex-besties, you know? But there's more. Africa is also being influenced by the East African Rift. That's one of those massive cracks we talked about earlier, but it's happening on land, which makes it extra dramatic. This is what's causing the continent to slowly split apart. It's a long story, but let's just say the rift is pulling Africa in more directions than South America ever had to deal with. Okay, Now it is finally time to talk about that crazier thing that might happen to South America and everything around it in the future. Theory number 1. It could break away from North America. I know, super dramatic, but don't panic. We're talking hundreds of millions of years from now, and I won't be around. You see, both continents are moving in the same general direction, but at different speeds. The North American plate is cruising along at about 1 inch per year, while South America is moving a bit faster. So even though they're heading the same way, they are not keeping pace. Over time, as the Atlantic Ocean continues to widen and the Pacific keeps shrinking, all this tectonic movement could eventually pull the Americas apart. Theory number 2. Marine life could go through some major changes. Right now, the Americas act as kind of a giant wall between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Because of that, sea animals have evolved differently on each side. Take the green sea turtle, for example. The ones living in the Atlantic tend to be bigger and lighter in color. Meanwhile, their Pacific cousins are usually smaller and darker. But if, one day, there is no land blocking these two populations from mixing, they would end up with brand new migration routes, new nesting spots, and a lot more overlap in their territories. Now, multiply that scenario by hundreds of other species, and things could really get shaken up. We're talking about new interactions, unexpected competition, and maybe even the rise of entirely new species. Alright, theory number 3. America might meet Africa again. Right now, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is busy creating a new seafloor, and because of that, the Atlantic Ocean is slowly getting wider. But in about 125 million years, scientists believe that process could come to a stop. Instead of the seafloor spreading apart, the ocean floor might start getting pulled under the continents. When that happens, the Atlantic will stop growing and start shrinking. And the water section between South America and Africa is likely to be the first part pulled beneath the land. That means the Americas and Africa could meet again. And when that happens, border countries could turn into super shaky places, with earthquakes happening all the time and brand new volcanoes popping up left and right. The eastern United States would no longer be known for the peaceful green slopes of the Appalachians, but for snow-covered giants that occasionally spew lava and ash, more like the Cascade Range out west. Countries would end up with totally new neighbors. Brazil might line up with Nigeria and Cameroon. Uruguay could be sitting right next to Angola. And Argentina might be sharing a border with South Africa. So if these two continents really do merge, how intense would that be? Well, for starters, this new supercontinent would instantly become the biggest one on Earth, about 1.5 times the size of Asia. And chances are, a brand new mountain range would form right where the continents meet, creating a natural border between nations. Being part of the same massive continent could make a lot of things way easier. For one, tourism could totally take off. People traveling between countries by land without needing pricey plane tickets could be a game changer. But it wouldn't stop there. Other types of economic activity could get a major boost too. Now on one side we have South America, which already produces and sells a wide variety of foods, from wheat to bananas, beef, cocoa, soybeans, hey, you name it. On the other side, there is Africa, exporting things like textiles and clothing. That alone would make them a super powerful bloc when it comes to trading raw goods. But can you name another important thing these two continents have in common? Yep, petroleum. Countries in South America, like Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia, are major oil exporters. And over in Africa, you've got Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya doing the same. Now, can you see just how powerful that kind of union could be? Meanwhile, let's talk about animals. These two massive lands coming together could lead us to wild meetups, like a capybara sharing space with a Nile crocodile, or a sloth seeing a hyena from the top of a tree. This could even lead to new animal hybrids showing up, like a tabby crocodile or a sloth hyena. Okay, those weren't the cleverest names, and honestly, these animals wouldn't be able to mate or even wouldn't want to. But you get the point, right? It's not all positive, unfortunately. New species showing up could become predators, competitors, or even parasites to the native plants and animals. It would take a long time for things to settle into a new balance in those border regions. But honestly, no one really knows how long it would take. The only thing I do know is neither of us will be around to see it, which is okay.
There's a mysterious dent in our planet's magnetic field, and it's slowly growing. It stretches from South America to Africa, and what's horrifying is that it's weakening Earth's protection shield against the sun. They call it the South Atlantic anomaly. And while most people on Earth don't feel its effects for now, satellites and spacecraft passing through it already do. Deep inside our planet, there's a giant ball of molten iron and nickel, the outer core. The metal inside is so hot that it's constantly moving and swirling. This movement creates electrical currents, and when electricity flows, it generates a magnetic field. This field surrounds the entire planet like a protective bubble. Without it, life on Earth would be in serious trouble. The sun blasts out charged particles called solar winds that could destroy our atmosphere over time. Luckily, the magnetic field deflects most of these particles, keeping us safe. Other planets without magnetic fields like Mars lost their magnetic fields, got their atmospheres stripped away, leaving them dry and lifeless. And also, without the magnetic field, our technology and equipment gets all messed up. Satellites, power grids, and even airplanes could get hit by intense radiation. This would lead to communication failures, GPS errors, and blackouts. And now, something strange has been going on underneath the African continent. An enormous blob of dense rock deep inside the Earth, called the African Large Low Shear Velocity Province, has been growing and messing the magnetic field up. Scientists think that this weird rock-like thing is messing with the flow of the outer core, disturbing the magnetic field above it. That disturbance is what weakens the shield over the South Atlantic. It's like a crack in a windshield. It might not shatter immediately, but the weak spot spreads over time. Now, NASA is watching it closely. Satellites passing through this anomaly experience random glitches and shutdowns. Sometimes their circuits short-circuit from high-energy solar particles. Mission operators have to turn off systems before entering the danger zone, and it's only getting worse. The anomaly is drifting westward. This means that new areas could fall under its influence. What's even worse, it seems like it's been splitting in two, which means our planet has been developing two weak spots instead of one. And here's something crazy. Some scientists believe that this entire thing is part of a long-term cycle that's been repeating for over 11 million years. And that cycle would make our magnetic poles flip. North could literally become south, and vice versa. Earth's magnetic poles have flipped before, although the last time that happened was 780,000 years ago, way before humans started roaming around the planet. These reversals happen every few 100,000 years. Now, some wonder if our anomaly is the beginning of the next flip, but scientists aren't sure if we're overdue or just in a temporary phase. Luckily, if a flip were to happen, it wouldn't be instant. It would take thousands of years. But as the field weakens, more radiation would reach Earth's surface. It would mess up not just technology and equipment, but also us, and even animal migration patterns. Many animal species use Earth's magnetic field to navigate. And they even have some potential culprits that could have caused this weird thing. There are two massive, mysterious blobs of hot, dense material deep inside our planet. One is under Africa, and the other formed under the Pacific Ocean. They're called large, low-velocity provinces. Basically, huge underground rock-like formations. Both blobs are gigantic. Each one is hundreds of times taller than Mount Everest and stretches across thousands of miles. They make up 6% of the entire Earth's volume and are one of the biggest geological features inside our planet. They're also super weird and could be structured more like trees than some lumpy mountains. Scientists imagined them as softened rock at first, but based on recent imaging techniques, it looks like they might actually have jagged, branch-like structures extending upward. These are like branches of a tree. They could be feeding hotspot volcanoes at the surface, like the ones in Hawaii. Scientists still don't know exactly what these blobs are. However, they believe they control a lot of what happens on Earth's surface. Stuff like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and, of course, changes in the magnetic field. They may also be linked to supervolcanoes and mass extinctions. The eruptions that they could cause could be like the ones that happened in ancient times and possibly wiped out entire species. If the blobs are connected to supervolcanoes, they might have had absolutely insane disasters in the past and might even cause more troubles in the future. But they also help us control plate tectonics, which affect earthquakes and mountain formation. They might also contain material from Earth's early days, or even from Theia. That was the mysterious planet that crashed into Earth and helped form the Moon about 4.5 billion years ago. Finally, Earth literally breathes because of these blobs, which is insane. The Sun and the Moon's gravitational pull stretches the Earth slightly, making it rise and fall like a breath. But now, scientists found that this tidal movement is slightly off-kilter over the blobs. They literally interfere with how the Earth's mantle moves. These two huge structures actually actively affect how our planet behaves, which is super dangerous. We only recently learned how these blobs actually appeared on our Earth. It's all because of the sunken ocean crust. Over hundreds of millions of years, parts of the ocean floor have sunk deep into the Earth's mantle. These slabs of rock stacked up at the bottom. This way, they slowly formed these massive blobs of recycled crust. Scientists haven't agreed on whether the blobs are heavier or lighter than the rest of the mantle. One study suggested they are denser, which would mean they're made of heavier material. Another study suggested they are less dense, meaning they could be hot, rising plumes of lighter rock. The African blob is suspected to be one of the causes of the South Atlantic anomaly, but scientists are still investigating how exactly they are connected. Since the African blob is basically a giant dense blob sitting on top of the outer core, it could cause troubles. The African blob is hotter and possibly chemically different from the surrounding mantle. It could be disturbing the outer core, affecting the magnetic field, weakening it. Another crazy thing is that they might contain an ocean of water locked inside their minerals. Scientists discovered that huge amounts of water, as much as all of Earth's oceans combined, are trapped in minerals deep in the mantle. One mineral, ringwoodite, can store water inside its crystal structure, but it's only possible under extreme pressure and super hot temperatures, like in the deep mantle. So there could be vast hidden water reservoirs inside the blobs. Not literal bodies of water, of course, but tons of little water molecules weirdly locked away deep beneath the surface. If this water were somehow released, it could potentially trigger massive volcanic activity, or even affect global climate. But the blobs are not the only factor for this weird anomaly. Other factors also contribute, like the tilt of Earth's magnetic field, changes in the core's iron flow, and even plate tectonics. However, the large provinces are making things worse. They keep evolving somehow. Scientists think that it might be because massive columns of hot rock called mantle plumes are rising from deep inside the Earth. These plumes could be pushing the giant pieces of Earth's crust like tectonic plates around, especially in the Pacific Ocean. If this is true, then these giant underground blobs aren't just sitting still. They're moving, changing, and shaping the Earth's surface all the time, almost like they're alive. So what does this mean for the future? If the African blob continues evolving, the South Atlantic anomaly might get larger or shift further, affecting more satellites and spacecraft. Right now, there are still more questions than answers. Every new data point helps predict how it will evolve and whether we need to worry about the worst-case scenarios. For now, NASA isn't panicking, but they're watching very closely. Because whether it's a harmless shift or a sign of something bigger, one thing is clear: something deep inside Earth is changing. A man went for a walk not far from Buenos Aires in Argentina and found something that looked like a dinosaur egg lying in the mud. When he shared his find with his family, everyone thought it was a joke, but it was actually very real. Except it wasn't a dinosaur egg, but a glyptodont shell. These guys went extinct thousands of years ago. Some of them grew up to be the size of a small car. The Paleo-Indians, who were the ancestors of Native Americans, must have had a fun time living alongside those beasts. People keep finding similar black scaly shells, which are fossils of glyptodonts in the Americas. These creatures thrived in South America for tens of millions of years and also spread up north. They had thick armor, called a carapace, and tough, grooved teeth for eating grass. They weren't always giant, but it looks like a colder climate before the Ice Age, with open woodlands and plenty of grass, helped them evolve. It's pretty hard to hide when you're huge, so they may have developed their fused armor to protect themselves. One of the most famous types had a long tail with spikes that it used to fight other glyptodonts for territory or mates. Although they look similar, the ancient glyptodonts were really different from today's armadillos. Glyptodonts had a hard, heavy armor made of fused plates, and today's armadillos have flexible armor and can roll up into a ball to protect their soft tummies. Plus, glyptodonts ate grass using their grooved teeth, and armadillos prefer insects for lunch. But despite all the differences, recent studies of their DNA showed that glyptodonts actually belonged to the armadillo family. If you think the glyptodont was scary, just wait till you meet the giant short-faced bear. This bad guy grew to almost twice the height of Michael Jordan when it stood on its hind legs. It also weighed over 1,500 pounds, and it was able to run at the speed of over 40 miles per hour. This bear preferred meat to all other foods. Even its skull and teeth were designed for slicing through meat, and it had forward-facing eyes that gave it sharp vision. Its strong jaws and large muscles helped it crush bones to get to the nutritious marrow inside. The giant short-faced bear lived in places like Minnesota and west of the Mississippi River, all the way up to Alaska. It went after or scavenged big animals like bison, musk oxen, deer, and even ground sloths. But it eventually went extinct because its prey didn't survive the Ice Age. Today, the only living relative of the short-faced bears is the spectacled bear from South America. This guy is much smaller, about the size of a black bear, and it eats both plants and meat. Game of Thrones fans, the next one is for you. The orphaned wolf cubs adopted by the Stark family in the epic series were inspired by dire wolves. Their name translates from Latin as terrible wolf. These great uncles of modern dogs were almost 5 feet from head to tail and weighed around 150 to 200 pounds. The oldest record of the dire wolf is from 250,000 years ago. They adapted well to different conditions and lived pretty much all over North America, from as far north as Alaska to down into southern Mexico. They went extinct around 10,000 years ago, soon after the last Ice Age. They most likely just lost their source of food. The closest we have to dire wolves now is the gray wolf, but don't get too upset. Scientists think they could be able to bring the dire wolf back to life. They can combine intact straps of their DNA, recovered from the museum specimens and the genome of modern dogs. One animal you definitely wouldn't want to be on the de-extinction program is the saber-toothed cat. This bad guy lived in prehistoric North America and parts of South America. And nope, it's not related to modern tigers or other cats. It just went extinct. It had the title of the most fearsome Ice Age predator for a long time, until scientists found out at least one species of it was more like a kitty cat. Smilodon, by the way, Diego from Ice Age was one of those, could only chomp down with 1/3 of the force of modern lions, but it could open its mouth at a 120 degrees angle, and it could wrestle even large prey to the ground with its powerful body, with disproportionately thick front legs and strong neck. The kitty was probably just too afraid to use its long and narrow teeth that could break easily. And one more detail. It had to have lips that could stretch well for the jaws to open wide, so it most likely drooled like a St. Bernard. Well, at least their teeth grew twice as fast as those of modern lions, and fully formed by the age of 3. The giant beavers, called castoroids, must have grown at the same rate, or so to get as big as a couch. They were about 8 feet long and weighed 200 pounds, which is as heavy as a large refrigerator. They had huge 6-inch long front teeth for gnawing, a narrow tail, and long, shaggy fur. This giant creature lived alongside mammoths and saber-toothed tigers in the woodlands of North America. Like today's beavers, the giant beaver probably spent a lot of time in the water since it was too heavy to move quickly on land. Unfortunately, we don't know for sure if giant beavers built equally giant dams. Even if they did, none of those structures survived over time. Some people think a giant beaver built a 4-foot-tall dam in Ohio, but it's just a guess. Eventually, the giant beaver disappeared, just like other big animals from the last ice age. Early human settlers in North America may have sped up its extinction, as they probably liked its thick fur and meat. By the Ice Age, mastodons, some remote offsprings of the early elephants from Africa, crossed a land bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska and made it to North America. Mastodons, like woolly mammoths, had thick, shaggy fur that helped them keep warm in the cold climate of the Ice Age. But unlike the mammoths, who mostly grazed, mastodons were mostly browsers. They like to eat leaves from shrubs and the lower branches of trees. Scientists often find woolly mammoth fossils together, which means they probably lived in groups, like family herds. Mastodon fossils are usually lying alone. This means they may have preferred living on their own and only came together to mate or for a short time with their young. Sadly, both mastodons and woolly mammoths went extinct around 11,000 years ago, not long after the Ice Age. Scientists think this may have happened because of changes in weather patterns, fewer food sources, and possibly early humans. They figured out that one mastodon could feed a tribe for a week and dress them for years. You can mostly find camels in deserts in places like North Africa and the Middle East now. But scientists believe they actually came from North America, especially the lands west of the Mississippi River. Fossils show that camels appeared on Earth about 44 million years ago. In 2015, a team of scientists from the University of Louisiana discovered the bones of a giant ancient camel in Oregon. This camel was between 12 and 14 feet tall, like a modern giraffe. It lived around 7 million years ago and had a long neck to help it reach high plants. About 6 million years ago, some early camels crossed into Asia over the Bering Strait land bridge. Once they arrived in Asia, these camels split into 2 types we know today: the Bactrian camel with 2 humps and the dromedary camel with 1 hump. You won't find wild camels in North America anymore, but some of their relatives, such as llamas, alpacas, and guanacos, still live in South America. There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land. So they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings. And they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the Canal Zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges. Humans are at the top of the food chain, but despite this, some creatures cause us a lot of trouble, and we can't do anything about them. Look at these flies with red eyes and blue-green bodies. These are some farmers' worst nightmare in the United States of America. Meet the New World screwworm flies. These little troublemakers have been munching on livestock from Florida to California for centuries, racking up some serious damage to the agricultural scene. To combat these pesky flies, the U.S. Department of Agriculture dropped a whopping 15 million sterile screwworm larvae from helicopters along the Panama-Colombia border. There's even a factory in Panama cranking out these sterile larvae like it's factory-fresh fruit. This action sounds weird, but it makes a lot of sense. The thing is, female flies only get one shot at mating in their entire lives. So if they happen to mate with a sterile dude, that's it. No offspring, ever. This clever trick means healthy screwworms can't reproduce when surrounded by sterile pals, which keeps their numbers in check. But how do we make these male flies sterile in the first place? Simple. A little radiation zap does the trick. You throw a bunch of flies in a lab, give them a quick spin through an X-ray machine, and then drop them from a helicopter into the wild, where their relatives are hanging out. If screwworms start making a comeback, inspectors hop on ATVs and cruise thousands of miles to hunt down any infected animals and stop the spread. There's no magic trick to wipe out these parasites completely, but the game plan is clear. Keep the sterile fly drops coming and stay one step ahead of these pesky little critters. Do you know why it's too dangerous to move animals from one habitat to another? There's a possibility that they won't encounter predators in the new area and will become an invasive species that will provoke an ecological disaster. Here's a simple example. In the 30s in the 20th century, farmers from Australia faced a serious problem. Cane beetles were spoiling sugarcane in the northern part of the country. Insects devoured a huge amount of the harvest, and people couldn't stop it. They didn't want to spoil the cane with poisonous pesticides, so they brought a group of cane toads from South America in the hope that the toads would eat the pests. But when these toads found themselves in the reed fields, they couldn't reach the bugs, as they lived on tall reeds. The toads just couldn't jump at such height and get the pests. So instead of beetles, they began to eat other insects. Amphibians started multiplying at a tremendous rate. The female cane toad can lay about 30,000 eggs at a time. After 3 days, small tadpoles hatch from the eggs. They swim in the water for 20 weeks and then turn into grown-up toads that live from 5 to 10 years. Millions of jumping animals began taking over the entire northern part of the continent, destroying all the biodiversity around. Leaves, grass, insects, carrion. Toads ate all this and didn't leave food for other animals. The problem was that the toads turned out to be very hardy creatures. Heat, cold, rain, droughts, they can breed anywhere and nothing can stop them. But what about other animals? Australia is full of alligators, big birds, and other creatures that would love to feast on croaking amphibians. Yes, it's true. But any animal that tried to eat these toads didn't survive. The problem is that cane toads are venomous. There are special glands behind their eyes that produce strong toxins that cause serious health problems in any animal. Some farmers saw birds falling from the sky after they had swallowed these amphibians. More than 80 years have passed since farmers brought 100 cane toads to Australia. Now, there are about 1.5 billion of them. They have already covered 386,000 square miles, which is about the same area as the states of Texas and Oklahoma combined. And so far, scientists and biologists haven't come up with an effective way to deal with them. People tried to catch them, but it was useless. Even if you catch 98 toads out of 100 next to a small pond, the 2 remaining toads can produce 30,000 eggs per night. Nature may be able to restore balance when some animals with immunity to toad toxins appear in Australia. But at the moment, cane toads are unstoppable. How can we stop the uncontrolled population of mosquitoes that are dangerous to humans? The correct answer is to create 735 million genetically modified mosquitoes and mix these 2 groups. All over the world, many species of mosquitoes carry infections that cause serious health problems to humans. Almost no one likes mosquitoes. These buzzing insects prevent us from sleeping, and their bites are incredibly itchy. Many people would probably be happy if these creatures disappeared from the face of the earth. And scientists might have found a way to make this wish come true. Only female mosquitoes bite us because they need food to produce eggs. So, scientists released genetically modified male mosquitoes with a special protein in their bodies. After 2 mosquitoes come into contact, this protein is transmitted from the male to the female and then prevents it from producing offspring. All this happens before the age when females begin to bite. So, females can't create offspring, which means they don't need to bite people and animals anymore. And the more of such proteins scientists spread, the smaller the mosquito population will be. It sounds good, but about 240,000 people have signed a petition to cancel this experiment. Many scientists believe that the disappearance of one insect species can lead to a biological catastrophe. Nature is a complex, balanced system where the slightest change can lead to serious problems. Mosquitoes are a food source for many reptiles and amphibians. The extinction of mosquitoes can trigger the disappearance of many species. It's like a chain reaction of catastrophes, the end of which is unknown. Nevertheless, modified mosquitoes have already been released in Florida, and it seems that nothing terrible has happened. The good news is that people have fewer health problems after that. Moreover, since 2019, about 1.5 billion mosquitoes have been released worldwide. It has saved millions of lives and hasn't disrupted the delicate balance of nature yet. Recently, scientists have released another group of safe mosquitoes in East Africa. Well, let's hope that scientists have everything under control. Invasive species are not always mosquitoes, flies, or amphibians. These can also be large animals, such as feral pigs or super pigs. These pigs are a mix of domestic swine and wild boar. There are already almost 7 million feral hogs in the south of the USA. Thanks to people's efforts, these animals haven't spread to the north yet. But the danger to the northern states comes from Canada. Pigs were brought there in the 80s to support agriculture. But in the early 2000s, wild boars lost their popularity. They just stayed in the wild, and farmers were sure that those animals wouldn't survive the harsh Canadian winter. Oh, how wrong they were. Wild pigs turned out to be hardy, mobile, and capable of rapid reproduction. These animals dig and tear up the ground, eat almost everything they come across, and thus take food from other animals. By the way, other creatures can become their lunch too. Wild pigs attack mice, geese, ducks, and some species of deer. They trample crops, grass, and flowers and are not afraid of anything. They're like natural bulldozers. Any farm is in danger of extinction if it's in the path of thousands of super pigs. And people can't do anything with them. The northern states understand that an invasion is imminent, so they're preparing for a long battle. Super pigs love swampy areas with tall grass. Canadian and American farmers will try to drive them into more open areas and fence those places off. The plan is not perfect, but it can slow the pigs down and save some time. If you're planning a trip across the Atlantic, you should prepare for more than just the jet lag. Depending on where you land, life in Europe can seem a bit unusual. So it's best to do a bit of research before you travel. Speaking of quirky little differences, one of the first things you may notice is the lack of AC. Hope you like fresh air because central air conditioning isn't everywhere like you might be used to. In Europe, you might find that someone's flat, office, or even a full restaurant doesn't have an AC unit. That's because some Europeans rely solely on their windows to get a breeze. However, bigger places like grocery stores and malls usually keep things well ventilated. Water in European restaurants is not always free either, even though this is common practice in the US. Sure, you'll get a fancy glass bottle at most places, but you'll also see it on your bill. More so, if you ask for water, be sure to specify if you'd like it still, because you might get sparkling water instead. Forget about getting a glass full of ice water too. You might get cold water from the fridge, but Europeans don't do the whole tons of ice thing like they do in the US. If you enjoy sightseeing on a budget, you know how helpful those public toilets can be. After walking for hours, it's great to stumble upon a bathroom where you can freshen up a bit. Well, you better have the equivalent of 50 cents or so in your pocket, because in many European countries, you've got to pay to use these public restrooms. Even fast food restaurants might charge you for the privilege. The best workaround is to head to a mall. Their restrooms are usually free. Also, in the US, bathroom stalls often have a gap at the bottom. Some say this design was chosen for cleaning purposes and accessibility. In Europe, however, stalls tend to reach the floor for more privacy. Name days are also kind of a big deal in Europe, despite not being so popular in the US. Each day of the year is like a mini birthday celebration for someone with a specific name. Europeans who follow this tradition see it as a second birthday, and even some take it more seriously than their actual birthday. Even the way we perceive things can be totally different depending on where you're from. Take a 100-year-old building in Europe that's practically brand new, but in the US, it's considered old. Depending on who you ask, some Americans might even consider an object that is 200 years old to be ancient. Europeans reserve this word for something that comes from a time before the Middle Ages. However, when it comes to distances, it's quite the opposite. Europeans might find driving 100 kilometers, or about 60 miles, to be a lot, while for Americans, that's a short trip. It does make sense if you think about it though, because Europe is way more crowded. In fact, the entire European Union is only about half the size of the US. Either way, Europeans are always on the move, whether it's inside their continent or jetting off somewhere else on the planet. It's probably because most European countries are so small by comparison that people grow up thinking it's normal and easy to cross borders all the time. Even the appliances tend to be different when comparing the two regions. Take washing machines, for instance. In Europe, most of them only hook up to cold water and they load from the front. In the US, it's common to have machines that use both hot and cold water and load from the top. On that note, make sure to research the type of electrical plug used in your European country of choice before traveling. You might find you'll need special adapters to be able to use your phone charger or curling iron while on holiday. Thankfully, most hotels are prepared for these issues and can offer adapters on demand, free of charge. Fridges might seem a bit different too. That's because tiny ones are the norm in Europe, except for large families who invest in bigger fridges and freezers. It's not all bad, especially if you enjoy sharing groceries with roommates, less food wastage, and more frequent trips to the store for fresh food. Might also want to polish your metric system knowledge before heading to Europe too. Everyone there is using meters, grams, liters, and Celsius. Sure, people in the US might learn the metric system in school, but they stick to the other system for their everyday lives, with yards, miles, pounds, and Fahrenheit. Make sure you also double-check dates and times before making any reservations. Europeans write their dates like day, month, year, while Americans flip it to month, day, year. Also, in the US, the week usually begins on Sunday and wraps up on Saturday. But in Europe, it starts on Monday and ends on Sunday. Be on the lookout for the different time format too. In some countries, if someone says it's 14, that translates to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Even advertising might seem a bit different when you first land in Europe. In the US, you might see people wandering around in inflatable costumes on the street to promote local business, but that's a rare sight in Europe. Also, those massive billboard signs you often see along American highways aren't available in most European countries. They're usually against the law because it's believed that drivers should be focused more on the road ahead. And such advertising techniques can be too distracting. Moving on to street names and shopping hours. In North America, especially the USA, it's common to name streets with numbers, like 5th Avenue or 16th Street. But if you head over to Europe, you'll find that streets usually have actual names. In some really rural spots in Europe, you might even stumble upon roads with no names at all. In Europe, there's also a cool tradition of naming roads that connect cities after the city they lead to. Shopping hours in Europe can be a bit confusing too, at times even frustrating. You've probably heard of the siesta in Spain, with some Mediterranean countries having similar customs. It's when shops and businesses take a little afternoon break. Smaller venues in European cities might close up for lunch breaks or have shorter hours on weekends. Some might even stay shut altogether on specific days. It's best to check out the local schedule if you're planning some retail therapy while traveling in Europe. Those shopping hours can really affect your plans and how easily you can get your hands on the stuff you need. While Americans tend to smile more, even to strangers, it can seem a bit unusual to people from other countries. There's a reason behind it though. You see, over the years, the US became this melting pot with people coming in from all over the globe. Being friendly and agreeable became crucial to bridge the gaps created by different cultures and languages. Sometimes it's more helpful to be nice than to be brutally honest. TV watching preferences can also seem different in Europe. Take Norway, for example, where you'll find this cool concept called slow TV. You know how we sometimes zone out in front of a show for hours? Well, Norwegians have turned that into a national sport, if you'd like. Think of it as the visual equivalent of background music. None of us get glued to the screen watching hours of wood burning or knitting marathons. But you might want to check it out when you need some background entertainment that doesn't demand your full attention. Speaking of taking things slow, you might have also heard about a concept called hygge. It's this whole way of life up in the Nordic European countries. Some think these life principles could be the secret to happiness. It's about creating a life that's free from annoying or overwhelming stuff. It's also about prioritizing your relationships and striving to always have a positive attitude.
Can you pronounce this name of the Aztec capital city? Yes, it's quite difficult to say in English and above my pay grade. Okay. It's Tenochtitlan. And Mayan cities are hard to pronounce too. Consider Jaxchilan. They must be part of the same language, right? Well, not really. The Aztecs and the Mayas were among the most famous Mesoamerican peoples. That's present-day Central America. But they didn't speak the same language, and they weren't even the same civilization. The two nations lived in different eras. The Aztecs dominated the region from the 14th to the 16th century. Back in Europe, this was near the end of the Middle Ages. The Mayas came before the Aztecs. Historians believe they started building city-states in the 3rd century. Their peak lasted until the 10th century. Now, this doesn't mean that the Mayas and the Aztecs didn't have contact with each other. But at the time this happened, the Mayas were on a decline, so the Aztecs traded more with their descendants than with real Mayan people. The two civilizations didn't even live in the same place. The Aztecs built their cities in the north of what is today Mexico. The Mayas lived to the south of them in the Yucatan Peninsula. Yes, that's also in Mexico nowadays. But the Mayas inhabited parts of modern-day Guatemala and Belize as well, and they spoke a number of languages. There's a whole Mayan language family they spoke, not just one language. Some of those languages have survived through today. Estimates show that there are 6 million indigenous Maya people groups spread across Central America. In Guatemala, there are 21 Maya languages recognized by the authorities. Further north, in Mexico, the number of official languages is 29. For the Aztecs, the situation is much simpler. They had a single language. It still has around 1.5 million native speakers, mostly in central Mexico. That's more than any other family of indigenous languages in the region. But is there a chance a speaker of Aztec languages can understand a speaker of the Maya language? Not by a long shot. The two languages are completely unrelated. In fact, they didn't even share the same writing systems. The Mayans were more advanced because they used hieroglyphs. Yep, like the ancient Egyptians. Instead of letters that make up words, ancient civilizations used tiny pictures to symbolize an object or a concept. When the Mayas wanted to write the word jaguar, for example, they would draw a small image of the animal. In total, their writing system had more than 800 characters like this one. Way too complicated compared to the modern way we write down words. But the Aztecs were one step behind the Mayas. They used pictograms and ideograms. Simply put, these are elaborate drawings that mark an object, animal, or concept. Compared to Mayan hieroglyphs, they aren't simple symbols anyone can draw, but true masterpieces of visual art. Only highly skilled painters could draw them. I don't say write because, technically, the Aztecs didn't have a writing system. So you could say that the Mayas were more advanced when it came to language. After all, they had the only known fully developed language in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. But in terms of culture and economy, the two societies weren't that much different. Neither of them used work animals for agriculture and transport. The main crop for both peoples? You guessed it, corn. What they called maize. Christopher Columbus was the first to transport corn back to the old continent in 1493. The Mayans also cultivated sunflower, vanilla, and cotton. The Aztecs produced chili, beans, and squashes. When it comes to meat, the Aztecs were happy to catch fish and shrimp. The Mayans penned turkey, just like we do with chicken today. The Aztec society consisted of nobles and commoners, all led by an emperor. The Mayas mostly lived in independent city kingdoms, ruled by a king and his royal household. There were no wheeled vehicles in these civilizations. Aztec merchants traveled across Mesoamerica carrying goods on their backs. Not the most comfortable mode of transportation, definitely. We shouldn't think of Aztec roads as the ones we have today. They were narrower because they saw only foot traffic. Mayas used a similar road system that also included canoes. They wouldn't travel far from the coast, though. They carved out these vessels from large tree trunks. An average Mayan canoe was 50 feet long. That's the length of a modern-day yacht. The goods these Mayas traded ranged from salt to pearls. They considered meat a luxury good, together with gold, copper, and turquoise. And can you guess the currency of Mayan merchants? Let me give you a hint. It wasn't metal and paper like it is today, but cocoa beans. They had a fixed market price, which made them the ideal payment option. The situation in modern societies is not much different. Around 2/3 of all countries have pegged their currency to the US dollar. For Mesoamericans, cocoa beans were their green banknotes. The Aztecs used the same exact currency, but with a twist. They had something called axe money. One axe was worth 8,000 cacao seeds. I bet their exchange offices were fun places to work. When it comes to minerals, jade was highly esteemed in both cultures. The Mayas and the Aztecs made tools and ornaments from it. These peoples believed jade brought beauty and long life to the person who wore it. Their jade mines were located in present-day Guatemala. And remember that city from the beginning that we could hardly pronounce? The founding of the Aztec capital gives an insight into the belief system of the whole nation. According to legend, the Aztec deity told them to build a city in the place where an eagle sits on a cactus with a snake in its talons. They saw this happen on an island in a lake. This is where they built the city. If you want to find it on the map of Central America today, look for Mexico City. That's the site of an ancient Aztec capital. It even got its name from the ancient nation, because Mexica was an alternate name for the Aztecs. They constructed the city on small artificial islands. It was slightly bigger than the surface area of London Heathrow Airport. The Mayas didn't have a capital city as we know it today. Their civilization spanned across 40 cities. These settlements had a population of 5 to 50,000 inhabitants. Today, these sites could be classified in terms of size as small American towns. But the total number of Mayan cities is not final. Archaeologists keep discovering new ones deep in the jungle of the Yucatan Peninsula. Quite recently, researchers unearthed a new site in the southeast of Mexico. They found a number of stone columns and named the city after the Mayan word for it. Back in the day, the city was part of the central Maya lowlands. Today, this region is covered with thick jungle. The Maya abandoned their settlements in this area around the 8th and the 9th century. Historians still cannot agree on why this happened. Some claim overpopulation was the main issue. Others argue the trade routes collapsed, so Mayan cities couldn't flourish anymore. Whatever the case, northern Mayan cities lived on. The descendants of these peoples were there when the Europeans stumbled upon them several centuries later. The Aztecs were also present in today's Mexico at this time, but contact with a foreign culture didn't bring them much good. There was an outbreak of smallpox that sealed the Aztecs' fate. This doesn't mean that this American nation left the world stage forever, though. Every time we say words like avocado, chili, guacamole, chocolate, and coyote, we're actually reviving the Aztec language. These words are present in pretty much every language on the planet. Mayan words also entered modern English. Linguists argue that the word shark actually comes from a Mayan language. This is the word these ancient Mesoamerican people used for fish. Both ancient civilizations left behind pyramids, and they look very similar in style. The only hint that can help you differentiate between them is that there are way more Mayan ruins that still exist today. Finally, regarding maize, or corn as we call it, there's a story among the Maya descendants that their process of harvesting corn back then was called amazing. Get it? Maize? Corn? Okay, I made that up. You're not surprised, are you?
Imagine sitting at home, drinking coffee, and watching a new episode of your favorite series. And suddenly, boom! Crash! What's happened? Nothing terrible, just a meteorite that has just crashed into your kitchen after breaking the roof. You might think this story is entirely made up. But that's what actually happened in New Jersey during the Eta Aquarid meteor shower, which is active from April 19th to May 28th and peaking on May 5th through 6th. The space rock itself was the size of a pork roll sandwich. It was also pitch black and weighed almost 4 pounds. It slammed through the roof and hit the wooden floor, ruining it. When the inhabitants of the house found the rock and touched it, it was still warm. Luckily, the thing wasn't radioactive and there was no one at home at the time this intruder arrived. But the most shocking thing about this meteorite? Astronomers believe it might have come from a cosmic snowball traveling far, far away from Earth. To explain this, I'll have to tell you a bit more about the Eta Aquarid. This meteor shower is famous for its fast meteors, leaving long, glowing trails. It's produced by Comet Halley, completing its orbit around the Sun every 76 years. The comet hasn't visited Earth since 1986 and won't come back until 2061. Right now, it's somewhere near the constellation of Hydra, which is more than 100 light-years away from our planet. Every year, Earth has to pass through trails of debris left by the comet. They collide with our atmosphere, disintegrate, and create beautiful, colorful streaks in the night sky. And it happens every time Halley returns to the inner solar system. Its nucleus sheds a layer of ice and rock into space, and some of it reaches our planet. The Central New Jersey authorities believe the meteorite that sneaked into the house originated from that meteor shower. But I feel that you might be pondering another question that confuses many people. What's the difference between all those space bodies? I mean, there are so many of them flying out there. Meteors, meteorites, asteroids, comets. Ugh. Okay, let's figure it out together. An asteroid is a rocky body orbiting the sun. It's usually not very big and quite inactive. Comets are different. They're covered with ice that normally evaporates in sunlight, forming a coma, which is what a comet's atmosphere is called. This coma consists of dust and gas. A comet also has a tail that is made of dust and/or gas too. A meteoroid is a small part of a comet or asteroid that orbits the sun. If this meteoroid manages to sneak into Earth's atmosphere and vaporize there, it's a meteor. It's often called a shooting star. And finally, if a meteoroid manages to survive the passage through our planet's atmosphere and lands on Earth's surface, it becomes a meteorite. If you think such space guests are a rare occurrence, that's not exactly true. Every day our planet is hit with more than 100 tons of sand-sized particles. About once a year, a large, car-sized asteroid enters Earth's atmosphere, turns into an impressive fireball and burns, luckily, before reaching the surface of the planet. And every 2,000 years or so, a meteoroid the size of a soccer field hits Earth, causing a lot of damage. And now, imagine this. A huge, really ginormous asteroid is approaching our planet. There's no one on Earth to predict its appearance. Neither is there anyone to stop it. That's why soon, the asteroid crashes into the surface of Earth. The force of the collision is so powerful that the space visitor doesn't stop until it gets through the crust to a depth of several miles. The impact leaves a crater of more than 100 miles across. Thousands of cubic miles of solid rock instantly turn into vapor. The crash sets off a series of natural disasters that erase 75% of life on Earth. The creatures that were close enough to see the crash don't survive for longer than a few seconds. Even closer to the impact crater, the ground is covered with thousands of feet of hot ash, grit, and rubble. Several seconds later, everything for many miles around bursts into flames. What doesn't burn down within the next several minutes after the collision faces a different, even more terrifying fate. The asteroid causes a monstrous, largest ever tsunami. A recent study claims that it was thousands of times more powerful than any wave people have ever seen. The tsunami was so devastating, it eroded seafloor sediments half a world away. The team of scientists even remodeled the events of the first 10 minutes after the impact, and the model showed that the asteroid had produced waves up to 30,000 times greater than one of the largest tsunamis people have ever recorded, the one in the Indian Ocean in 2004. You've probably already guessed that I'm talking about a real-life event, namely the asteroid collision that wiped dinosaurs off the face of the Earth. The Chicxulub asteroid, as we now know it, is believed to come from the outer reaches of the solar system. This space body was at least 6 miles across. It crashed into the shallow seawaters near the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact was so powerful that it left its signature on the face of the planet. In 2021, researchers found out that the collision had carved mega ripples into Earth's crust in the region of modern-day central Louisiana. But such devastating events, when an object that large threatens Earth's inhabitants, happen very rarely, once every few million years. Space rocks smaller than 80 feet usually burn up in the atmosphere of our planet, causing little to no damage. If a rocky meteoroid larger than 80 feet but smaller than half a mile across was to hit Earth, it would cause local damage to the impact area. As for a space rock with a diameter larger than half a mile, it'd likely have worldwide effects. And these space bodies aren't even the largest. For comparison, asteroids populating the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter can be as huge as 580 miles across. But you can breathe out. They're too far away and don't pose any threat to our planet. All the time, our scientists keep learning more and more about hazardous asteroids and comets. They have even established a Planetary Defense Coordination Office, aka PDCO. It ensures that potentially hazardous objects get detected as early as possible. An object is considered potentially hazardous if its orbit is predicted to bring it within 5 million miles of Earth. It should also be large enough to reach the surface of our planet, over 100 feet across. Interestingly, a meteorite impact isn't the worst thing you need to worry about. Some scientists warn that the most dangerous thing is the shock wave produced by a meteor breaking apart in the atmosphere. For example, one meteor, which originally was an asteroid the size of a 6-story building, entered our planet's atmosphere in February 2013 and broke apart 15 miles above the ground. This generated a shockwave that was equivalent to a ginormous explosion. An even larger space visitor was called the Tunguska meteorite. It was also 10 times more energetic. It broke into pieces over the Tunguska River in June 1908, flattening 500,000 acres of forest. If the meteorite hadn't been so huge, this event would have gone undetected because of the remote location where it all happened. So it's a good thing that 90 to 95% of meteors don't survive the fall through our planet's atmosphere. Only those that are made of stronger materials make it so far. Most meteorites, though, are thought to come from comets, which are way more fragile than asteroids. We should also consider the speed of a meteor. If one is approaching Earth at a slower speed, it's more likely to survive the collision with the atmosphere of our planet. It means that the meteor won't burn completely, and some of its remains will reach the ground.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.